Chapter 134 Misunderstanding. Chapter 134 Misunderstanding. The days passed serenely, as if nothing had happened. In the blink of an eye, it was already the end of summer, and the weather was slightly cooler than the blistering heat of days past. The previous jumble of events had slowly settled down, and old Zhang Madam's death had seemingly been slowly forgotten by everyone. In Jining Wangfu, a snow pigeon fluttered in through the window and landed on the boxwood table in the middle of the room. Its wings accidentally came in contact with the ink in the well of the ink stone, and the snow-white feathers immediately became tinged with black. Xiao Xiao lifted the snow pigeon from the edge of the inkstone and placed it in his palm. The snow pigeon tilted its snow-white head to look at him. Its eyes like black beans were bright and intelligent. Xiao Xiao rubbed the snow pigeon's head and removed the copper tube tied to its leg. The message inside was brief, with a line of tiny handwriting near the top. Once Xiao Xiao had read the message, he slowly furrowed his brow. After a brief pause, he burned the message in the oil lamp, and ordered the person by his side, "Prepare my horse, I am leaving the capital." "Master." Genie was slightly hesitant. "Tell Yifeng to come out. He doesn't need to be at Yibao Pavilion any longer. He is to go to Baizhonglu and look for Qi Si." Genie's expression turned severe for a heartbeat before he replied, "Understood." In Ruanju, Tianju lifted the curtains and said, "Miss, the carriage is ready." Lu Zhu grabbed a small basket of little pastries from the table and said, smilingly, "It will be nice to eat these on the way." A few days ago, they had received an invitation from Dong Furen. Although it had been Dong Yinger's name on the invitation, it had been issued by Dong Furen, which could only mean that she wanted to invite Zhang Ruan to the Fu for a little tete-a-tete. After old Zhang Madam's death, in order to observe the proper morning etiquette, Zhang Ruan had simply stayed in the Fu, and had never gone out. Where Dong Yinger was concerned, they had not seen each other for such a long time that Lian Qiao and Bai Ji were somewhat surprised to receive this invitation from the Dong family out of nowhere. Thus today, Tianju had readied the horse carriage in preparation for a trip to Dong Fu. As they were leaving, they coincidentally encountered Zhang Dan and Hong Ying in the middle of a conversation. Hong Ying's belly had swelled considerably, and she looked like she was due to deliver in a few days. At present, Zhang Quan had handed over the management of the Zhang Fu's affairs to Hong Ying. Xia Yan had not yet been released from her confinement, and Second Yinyang had already passed away. Hong Ying was now the dominant figure, and had the bearing of the mistress of Zhang Fu. Xiang Xiao Yu Yun. Lit. The fragrance fades and jade crumbles/vanishes. Figure a beautiful woman dies. Lu Zhu's gaze flickered momentarily as she contemplated whether Hong Ying intended to have her cake and eat it too. Apart from Zhang Su, Hong Ying was always amiable towards Zhang Dan, and the two of them had an excellent relationship. On the surface, it appeared that Zhang Dan was not doing anything, but Lu Zhu had been with Zhang Ruan so long that she naturally had some sense of what might be going on. That Zhang Dan was not as innocent as she seemed to be, so wasn't Hong Ying slapping Zhang Ruan in the face by doing this? Or possibly, Hong Ying was thinking that fawning on Zhang Dan might enable her to cling to an imperial consort in future. To turn everything into gold / to have everything going one's way / to benefit from both sides. Although her smile was sweet, she could barely conceal the indignation in her eyes. Zhang Dan caught sight of the two of them first and smiled as she greeted them. "De Jejia?" Zhang Ruan nodded. "Fourth sister, fifth Yinyang." Hong Ying supported her belly with one hand, and there was no trace on her face of the haggardness and sloppiness that usually came with pregnancy. On the contrary, she was even more stunning, seemingly having enhanced the grace and charm she had previously possessed. In addition, her skin was as sleek as jade. Furthermore, her clothes and ornaments were of the best quality, evidence that she was greatly in Zhang Quan's favor. When she saw Zhang Ruan, she smiled and asked, "Where is eldest Miss going?" "Miss Dong has invited me to a gathering at the Fu." Zhang Dan smiled as she said, "De Jejia is truly enviable. You will also be able to foster many sisters in future. Why are you envious?" Hong Ying smilingly said, "Fifth Yinyang is making fun of me," Zhang Dan said with some degree of bashfulness as she lowered her head. Zhang Ruan observed the harmonious scene before her eyes. This Fu's youngest concubine and Shu daughter really got along well, contrary to expectation. That Hong Ying would act this way must have something to do with Jiang Quan's instructions. A hint of cold showed in her eyes briefly before she looked up with her usual pleasant expression and said, I won't disturb Fifth Yin Yang and Fourth Sister's little chat any longer. I will take my leave first. Walk slowly to Jiejia. Jiang Dan smiled with such benevolence that people who were unfamiliar with the situation might just think that the two of them were born of the same mother. After they had left the Fu and seated themselves in the carriage, Lu Zhu could contain herself no longer and said, What is Fifth Yin Yang's intention? It appears that she is on closer terms with Fourth Miss than Mississippi. Jiang Ruan shook her head dispassionately and said, Fifth Yin Yang is an intelligent person and naturally understands that no benefit lies in cultivating me. She was calmly indifferent about the situation. Previously, because of Xia Yan and Second Yin Yang, Hong Ying chose to side with Jiang Ruan. Now that Xia Yan and Second Yin Yang were gone, Hong Ying faced no threat in the Fu, and her life was set as long as she managed to win Jiang Quan's favor. However, Jiang Quan had never liked Jiang Ruan, and Hong Ying would lose Jiang Quan's favor if she continued to be friendly with Jiang Ruan. Isn't this too pragmatic? Lu Zhu pondered this and finally shook her head. Jianfeng Shijuo. Lit. See the wind and set the helm. Figure to act pragmatically / to be flexible and take advantage of the situation. People's hearts are fickle. There is no need to expect anything. Jiang Ruan shut her eyes and leaned against the side of the carriage. Lu Zhu stuck out her tongue but did not speak further. However, Tianzhu eyed Jiang Ruan pensively. The longer the time she spent with this mistress, the deeper her doubts about her. She could not understand where Jiang Ruan's almost godlike coldness of temperament came from. In some situations, Jiang Ruan was even more ruthless than a killer. While in the Genie Guard, Tianzhu had encountered all kinds of people, but she had never met such a cloistered young lady, whose intelligence was both formidable and frightening. Moreover, what Jiang Ruan had said just before Second Yin Yang's death was deeply engraved on Tianzhu's heart. Jiang Ruan had said that Jiang Fu owed her life debts, and she would claim them one by one. However, from beginning to end, the only person from her family who had died in Jiang Fu had been Zhao Mei, so why did she want to claim multiple life debts one by one? Tianzhu felt that Jiang Ruan was hiding a very deep secret, which even the maidservants who were considered very close to her did not know about. She thought perhaps she should look for a suitable occasion to bring this matter up to master. In Lord Mayor Fu, Dong Yinger reclined on the soft couch. Rather than recline, it was more that she had lost all her vigor and had collapsed on the couch. In comparison with her thin and wan appearance in the past few days, she looked better nourished. However, sorrow was still deeply evident on her face, and she looked nothing like a carefree young lady. Oh! The maidservant Hunger placed a bowl of freshly cooked lotus seed and molasses congee on the couch, and said with deference, Miss, please eat some congee. I don't want any, Dong Yinger retorted as she turned her head away weakly. Even if you don't want to, you should eat it. A cold and resolute voice was heard, and Lord Mayor Dong walked into the room. His expression was extremely stern, and he said harshly, Put away your unrealistic ideas. Your portrait has already been sent to the palace, and people from the palace will be here in a few days. You had better go to the palace obediently. Father, Dong Yinger said in a soft voice. Yet, her tone was resolute as she continued, Yinger will never enter the palace. Not enter the palace? Then, you can accompany your mother to the Chong family to make a formal apology, and enter the family. Dong Darren said in anger. Yinger will only marry one person in this lifetime, and he is the great Deputy General Jiang Xianji. The minute she said this, Dong Darren blew his top. He immediately raised his hand towards Dong Yinger, who faced him without fear. In the end, Dong Darren just could not bring himself to hit her, only saying furiously, muddle-headed, I see that you still cannot think clearly. You will be confined for a few more days. Having said this, he stormed off in a huff. After Dong Darren had left, all the vitality seemed to leak out of Dong Yinger, and she sagged against the soft couch, weeping. Dong Darren had always doted on her, but now, he had placed her under house arrest and ordered the servants to ply her with delectable food and drink daily with utmost care, for the sole reason of having her enter the palace. She had originally thought that she had a good father and sympathized with Zhang Ruan's bitter experience. However, looking at her current situation, there was no difference between her father and Zhang Ruan's father. In the end, they were equally heartless. In the outer hall, Zhang Ruan stepped down from the horse carriage and was welcomed into the Fu by the Dong Fu's servants. Zhang Ruan had visited Lord Mayor Fu several times, so the servants were well acquainted with her. She was led into the main hall, where Dong Foreign was sitting lost in thought. On seeing Zhang Ruan enter, she hurriedly rose to welcome her, saying, "Junju. Foreign, just call me Ruanyang," Zhang Ruan said with a faint smile. Dong Foreign smiled and said, "Ruanyang, I actually sent you that invitation in Yinger's name. Please don't blame me." Foreign speaks in jest, Zhang Ruan said as she smiled slightly. "But what has happened to Yinger Jiejie?" Dong Foreign's heart jumped. She looked at Zhang Ruan, meeting her gentle, smiling eyes, which seemed to hold some kind of magic power to reassure and incite trust. She relaxed somewhat inside before saying, "I'm not afraid of Juanju's laughter. Yinger, this girl, has never given me cause for worry, being very sensible from a young age." Ruanyang might have heard. Yinger had been in an arranged marriage with the third son of the Chong family from her adolescence, but at precisely this critical juncture she has fallen in love with someone, and she went and told third young Master Chong of her own accord. As a result, the Chong family terminated the arrangement. She observed that Zhang Ruan did not show any contempt, so she continued boldly, "If this kind of situation occurred in our Fu, it would not be tolerated, and it is the same for the Chong family." After the dissolution of the marital arrangement, news of the matter started to circulate. At her age, Yinger should have been match-made much earlier, but after this fuss, the families which had thought of arranging a marriage with Yinger all dropped the idea. Soon, people will say that Yinger has no choice but to remain in the Fu. In a fit of pique, Laoi had Yinger's portrait painted and submitted for the selection of imperial consorts. "Yinger Jiejie is unwilling?" Zhang Ruan asked. "She is unwilling." The look of worry on Dong Foreign's face deepened further as she said, "When Yinger found out, she had a big argument with Laoi. Laoi is gruff and abrupt by nature, and having to deal with such irrational behavior from his own daughter, he reacted by locking Yinger in her room and commanding the servants to watch her eat. He said if she used her own body to threaten him, if she threatened to starve herself, he would have the maidservants in her courtyard beaten to death. Yinger had no way out. She eats the food set before her daily, but she is visibly more sorrowful by the day. She said to Zhang Ruan, 'Good child, I know that you have a good relationship with Yinger, and she will possibly listen to what you say. Please convince her to give up on those unrealistic ideas, and stop her from descending further into this obsession.'" Zhang Ruan smiled a little and said, "Naturally, Ruanyang cannot help but to inquire, who is the person in Yinger Jiejie's heart?" Upon hearing these words, Dong Foreign's expression changed and she bowed her head, as if unable to bear the weight of the reply. She did not dare to look at Zhang Ruan's face. It took a moment before the words were eked out with much difficulty. "He is Juanju's Dage. Deputy General Jiang." The maidservant opened the curtains. Dong Yinger said impatiently, "Get out, I want to be by myself." "Miss, Hong and Junju has come to visit you," the maidservant said softly as she nodded towards Zhang Ruan, who was behind her. Zhang Ruan signaled the maidservant to go out, which she did, shutting the door behind her. Dong Yinger had been lying on the soft couch. When she heard the maidservant's words, she was startled. As if unable to comprehend the words Hong and Junju, it was a while before she suddenly reacted. She hurriedly sat up to look, and indeed Zhang Ruan was walking towards her. "Ruan Mimi," Dong Yinger said as she stood up in sudden alarm. When old Zhang Madam died, she ought to have visited the Zhang family with the Fu's people to offer her condolences, but Dong Darren had confined her to her room and forbidden her to go out, so she was unable to see Zhang Ruan. Actually, the two of them had not seen each other for a considerable length of time. These past few days, Dong Yinger had not met anyone from outside the Fu. Thus, to have Zhang Ruan pay her a visit out of the blue raised her spirits a little. She carefully assessed Zhang Ruan. Because it was still the period of mourning, Zhang Ruan was not able to wear red. Instead, she wore a green thin robe, extremely simple and muted in color, which conversely gave her a refined softness which she did not ordinarily exhibit. She still looked full of vitality. She had clearly not sunken into sorrow as a result of old Jiang Madam's death. Ruan Mimi, how are you? I can't leave the Fu, but I heard that you were arrested and imprisoned. You didn't suffer any grievance? Dong Yinger asked with concern. Jiang Ruan shook her head, and her gaze paused momentarily on Dong Yinger's face. Dong Yinger had always been vivacious and cheerful. Dong Darren had protected her well, and she seemed carefree and free of anxiety all the time. Now, the cheerfulness that had been a constant presence on her face had vanished, and what remained was a deep melancholy. Dong Yinger noticed Jiang Ruan's gaze and lowered her head uneasily before asking, Ruan Mimi? Why did you come to visit me? It was not that Zhao Jin, Lin Zixiang, Wen Fei Fei and the others had not come to visit her, but Dong Darren had told them that she was sick and sent them home. That Jiang Ruan had been allowed to enter the Fu by Dong Darren indicated that there must be some good reason. Dong Foreign invited me to come. My mother. Dong Yinger said suspiciously. Why did she ask you here? Jiang Ruan surveyed her wordlessly. Dong Yinger was briefly silent before saying, You know everything, don't you? Yes. Jiang Ruan said dispassionately. You are going to enter the palace. I don't want to enter the palace, Dong Yinger said as she shook her head frantically. I don't want to be sent to the palace, Ruan Mimi, please save me. Then, will you marry into the Chang family? Jiang Ruan asked. No, I don't want to marry into the Chang family either. Third young Master Chang is a good person, and I could not deceive him. Dong Yinger murmured. I already have someone in my heart. I can't be married to anyone else. She tightly clutched the silk cloth on her lap and continued. Father wants to send me into the palace and totally ignores my wishes. He doesn't listen to anything I say. What Dong Darren is doing is not wrong, Jiang Ruan said calmly, not moved in the slightest by Dong Yinger's words. Oh. When she heard this, Dong Yinger stared at Jiang Ruan incredulously. You actually think that what he's doing is right? No, father only wants to use me in exchange for the glory and wealth of the Fu. He only wants to ensure that I don't bespoil the good name of the Lord Mayor. Father has never once thought about me. Jiang Mimi, the way Minister Jiang treats you, surely you must resent him? How can you say my father is right? What's the difference between what my father is doing now and the way Minister Jiang treats you? Ruan Mimi, how can you say this? Her tone swelled with reproach and paranoia. So far removed from her former optimistic and cheerful self, Jiang Ruan quietly observed the young woman before her. In the fleeting passage of time, emotion had become a poison, transforming Dong Yinger into someone totally different, such that she would even treat her own father this way. Lord Mayor Dong and Jiang Quan were nothing alike. Jiang Quan sought riches and honor to gild the skies, and would not for a second hesitate to step on herself and Jiang Xinji in order to attain his desire. On the other hand, the Lord Mayor only wanted to help his obsessed daughter sober up somewhat, and it was a great pity that his painstaking effort had come to naught. Not only was there no way to clear the muddle in Dong Yinger's mind, she now hated him. Suddenly, Dong Yinger lifted her head and stared at Jiang Ruan fixedly, then abruptly flung herself off the couch to fall at Jiang Ruan's feet. With tears flowing down her cheeks, she said, Ruan Mimi, help me, help me. There is only Deputy General Jiang in my heart. I will never marry anyone else in my lifetime. Please help me persuade my father. Ruan Mimi, you are so clever. You will definitely think of a way. Her hair was disheveled and she spoke humbly as she prostrated herself at Jiang Ruan's feet like the withered grass by the roadside. With her hands gripping Jiang Ruan's legs and her hazily tearful eyes, she looked like she was at the end of her rope. Jiang Ruan sighed lightly, bent down, and pried Dong Yinger's fingers off her one by one. She looked at Dong Yinger with pity and said, Why should I help you? Dong Yinger was taken aback and could not comprehend what she meant. She then spoke with a mild expression and gentle tone, yet her words were completely callous. My Dage has no intentions towards you. What has it to do with him if you like him or not? Dong Yinger was at a loss for words. It was true at that time she and Jiang Xinji had only met hastily, and Jiang Xinji had not shown any special interest in her. She had fallen in love with him wholeheartedly without knowing his attitude, But she had been able to fool herself as he was busy with military duties and had to lead his troops into battle. Now that Zhang Ruan had laid out the naked truth, Dong Ying'er instantly felt embarrassed. You are both unwilling to enter the palace or marry into the Chang family. However, you will never be able to marry Dage. Zhang Ruan said softly. Why? Dong Ying'er asked with a sob in her voice as she looked at Zhang Ruan as if looking at a stranger. Why? Zhang Xianji's star was rising rapidly in the imperial court, and in future, he must not join 8th Prince's faction. The Lord Mayor had always maintained a neutral stand, and could not offend 8th Prince, neither could he offend 5th Prince. If Zhang Xianji were to actually marry Dong Ying'er someday, Xianli could use the Lord Mayor to threaten Zhang Xianji. Zhang Xianji would thus have another weak point, and would never be free of someone's control. If Zhang Xianji truly liked Dong Ying'er, then all this would not matter. Unfortunately, Zhang Xianji had not shown even a hint of interest towards Dong Ying'er. Because Dage does not like you. Zhang Ruan's words crushed Dong Ying'er's final delusion. She opened and closed her mouth several times before addressing Zhang Ruan. Why do you want to do this to me? In this world, the only thing which cannot be forced is love. Zhang Ruan nodded and said, if Ying'er Jiejie likes Dage, that is Ying'er Jiejie's business. Ying'er Jiejie has a resolute heart. She continued impassively, I just don't know if Ying'er Jiejie will be able to have no regrets, as you do now on the day that Dage gets married. Ruan Mimi, are you seriously so heartless? Dong Ying'er asked with difficulty. Zhang Ruan looked so beautiful and totally unperturbed as she said, yes. Chapter 135 Meeting Pair Again. Chapter 135 Meeting Pair Again. After departing from Dongfu, both Lu Zhu and Tianzhu did not dare to utter a word. Earlier, Zhang Ruan had been extremely callous towards Dong Ying'er, as if any past signs of friendship between them no longer existed. In the end, Dong Ying'er's complexion had become extremely unpleasant, and one feared that from this time forward, she would be estranged from Zhang Ruan. However, Zhang Ruan did not seem to take this matter to heart. After all, towards Dong Ying'er, she had no obligation to do so. Therefore, she could only direct her, Dong Ying'er, to think things through for herself. As for the matters between Zhang Xianji and Dong Ying'er, she would naturally place more importance on Zhang Xianji. After leaving Dongfu, it was still early. Upon reflection, she had not entered the palace in a while to visit Empress Dowager Ida. A few days ago, Yang Gugu had sent someone to deliver a letter to tell her to come over to the palace for a walk. Seeing as it was still the early hour, she had the horse carriage make a turn and head directly towards the palace. These days, the palace was abuzz with the matters of imperial consort selection, and as she walked along, she took in the training gugus who were selecting candidates from the names on the list. Zhang Ruan's lips curled up as she thought of how Zhang Dan's name would also be on it, and without anyone's leave, she headed towards Xianing Palace. Xuanxiu nude. To select talented individuals/women. The palace harem selection, as readers of light novels with historical themes should know, is often referred to the selection of talented ladies called xiu nu. It is used to select palace maids or replacements of imperial concubines, concubines/wives of princes, etc. Each dynasty has different standards for choosing and purposes of this selection. For example, the selection for concubines, more importance would be placed on looks, disposition, and family background. For palace maids, the standards would be lower. This was started in the Qing dynasty for ladies above 14 years old in an every 3-year cycle. As she walked towards a corner in a long corridor, her eyes fell upon a familiar figure that was standing by a flowerbed nearby. It was Princess He. Following Princess He were a few young palace maids, and she was leaning over to speak to someone else. As she walked closer, she then heard the words from Princess He's lips. To think a lowly despicable child born from a lowly palace maid could actually think that they are part of the royal family? It is still unknown whether they are even able to be raised safe and sound. This princess has already given him a beating today. What of it? The little person silently had his head lowered before Princess He, who pointed and scolded him. Clearly he was extremely frightened and hid behind a palace maid. That maid was also timid and was persistently nodding and bowing her head to apologize. Jiang Ruan's gaze narrowed slightly as she took a look at that tiny figure, and she couldn't help but shiver as she stiffened in place. It was rare for Jiang Ruan to have such a moment where her emotions were stirred up like this, and so when Tianzhu and Lu Zhu saw this they were puzzled and looked towards the little person. Yet what they saw was just a 3 to 4 years old young boy, who was dressed extremely plainly. Moreover, if one were to take a careful look at the details of his clothes, one could see that although the clothing material was gorgeous, it was not made of fine material. A child's skin was tender, and could very easily have abrasions due to this sort of rough stitches. That child's complexion was pale as if he was undernourished still. He was extremely delicate and adorable. Though while he was tightly clutching onto the corner of the palace maid's clothes, his expression was extremely timid. At a glance, his status was definitely not low on the ladder. However, that expression of his did not seem like that of an honorable noble's son. Furthermore, if this really was the son of a minister, it would definitely be too discourteous of Princess He to scold and insult him like this. Earlier, Princess He's words of part of the royal family had fallen on the ears of all those present, and Lu Zhu was puzzled. Could this possibly be one of the young princes? But for a young prince to be treated like this, it was as though he could not even compare to one of the royal family's slightly more dignified servants. Jiang Ruan stared at the young child without blinking, and it felt as if raging waves were surging in her heart. That child was not anyone else, it was Pei. In her last life, not too long after she had entered the palace, she had been conferred the title of Marin. Then, she had inadvertently caught sight of Pei. The emperor had been present as well, thus, he had simply handed over Pei to her to raise. In the vast, empty and deep depths of the palace, this child's background was too pitiful. Yet, he was extremely sensible, and so, the mother and son relied on each other for survival, finding pleasure in hardship. Thinking of it now, that period was the happiest in her past life after she entered the palace. Yet, now what surfaced in her mind was her final predicament when she had been forced to become a human swine that was placed in a wooden basin, and had to personally witness Li Dong taking liberties with Pei. Those mournful cries of Pei still seemed to resound in her ears. Jiang Ruan closed her eyes tight, and when she opened them again there was clarity. It would not happen again. In this life, Li Dong had long since died and the Grand Counselor Fu no longer existed. She had not entered the palace, and Pei, too, would not need to accept such a miserable ending anymore. She slowly walked forward with a slight smile. What is Princess He doing? Princess He had been scolding Xian Pei and naturally had not paid attention to Jiang Ruan's presence. When she saw her, she was startled at first. This was soon followed by the flash of anger and hatred that appeared in her eyes. Today, Princess He had worn a red outfit, and this hue of red was exactly the shade that Jiang Ruan liked to wear the most. Princess He had been blessed with a somewhat exotic bearing, and dressed as such, she exuded a rather ardent and brazen air. However, due to Jiang Ruan still observing mourning for her grandmother, she was unable to dress in bright and colorful clothing. Thus, she had only adorned herself in a plain pastel green gown. Although her clothes were plain and lightly colored, in contrast, it made her beauty become richer and splendid. She was lovely and gorgeous to her core, a sort of natural charm that was an eye-opener and made one alter their course for her. However, for any lady, upon seeing such outstanding good looks on another woman, they would always want to do a comparison, and this was especially so for Princess He, who was already at odds with Jiang Ruan. Seeing that her own dressing was unable to match up to Jiang Ruan's at once, she felt a peal of resentment as she spoke. Jiang Ruan, could it be that you too want to interfere in other people's business? There is nothing here for you to be concerned with. The palace ladies around them had all lowered their heads. Everyone knew that Princess He and Hong and Junju had always been at loggerheads. Moreover, these two Junsus were both masters who were not to be provoked. Xian Pei, who was still hiding behind the palace maid, seemed shocked by the sudden appearance of Jiang Ruan and peered at her unblinkingly. Jiang Ruan did not even look at Xian Pei as she laughed. Naturally, I would not interfere in this. I was on my way to greet Imperial Grandmother. She lightly floated a glance over Princess He. These affairs, Imperial Grandmother will obviously manage them. You, Princess He roared, you dare to threaten me. Jiang Ruan's meaning, of course, was that she would report everything that had happened here to Empress Dowager Ida. If one could say that Princess Hei received no small measure of doting, regardless of any laws or morality from the emperor, then Empress Dowager Ida happened to be one existence that she had always feared. That was only because Empress Dowager Ida had always had a cold and aloof personality that was not close to anyone. Yet, Zhang Ruan's relationship with Empress Dowager Ida was even closer and deeper than hers as the biological granddaughter of Empress Dowager Ida. Every time she thought of this, Princess Hei's stomach was filled with anger. Empress Dowager Ida was someone who was a stickler of rules, and if it was found out by Empress Dowager Ida that she had scolded Xian Pei, then she would punish her ruthlessly. This is not a threat. Zhang Ruan smiled. I was merely thinking. Princess is not afraid, right? Inwardly, Princess Hei could not help but want to tear Zhang Ruan into shreds with hatred. If this was like her usual course of action, based on her personality, she would naturally not bother to mind the location before she would cause a big ruckus. However, ever since Imperial Consort Chun had lost her momentum and power and was consigned to the Cold Palace, apart from the Empress, who didn't pose a threat at all, the remaining Imperial consorts had all exerted their efforts as they began to vie over the Emperor's doting. In addition to that, with the new batch of beauties that were about to enter the palace, Imperial Consort Shu wanted to win the Emperor's favor, and had constantly admonished Princess Hei not to cause trouble. This was especially so towards Zhang Ruan. She, Princess Hei, was to remember at all costs that she was not to have any conflicts in front of her Jr. Today, she was not in a great mood, and in walking along this area, she had just happened to encounter this 13th prince, Xian Pei. He was the least favored, who had been brought out to be in the sun by his palace maid. Xian Pei had been clasping onto a bunch of mud in his hands, and had accidentally fallen in front of her. That mud had dirted the corner of her skirt, and in a fit of anger, Princess Hei had slapped Xian Pei, but whilst she was in the midst of scolding him, she had never imagined that she would encounter this unlucky calamity, Zhang Ruan. Although she fiercely hated Zhang Ruan to the very depths of her heart, Princess Hei had learnt from the past lectures and experiences, therefore, she did not dare to continue scolding him in front of Zhang Ruan and only cursed, "What bad luck." Then, as if to maintain her menacing bearing, she growled at Xian Pei, "Humph! She can't always remain in the palace to protect you." After saying this, she left in a huff of anger with her palace maids. After waiting for Princess Hei to disappear from sight, Zhang Ruan turned to look towards the child behind the palace maid. Xian Pei's fair face had an astonishingly bright red hand imprint, and one wouldn't have to think hard to know who the culprit was. Perhaps Xian Pei had been terribly frightened by Princess Hei earlier, as his eyes were filled with a puddle of tears and reddened enough to make one feel distressed for him. Lu Zhu was such a person who felt tenderness towards children. She immediately crouched before Xian Pei and took out a handkerchief to clean the stains on his face. "Is young prince all right?" She was not sure which prince this was, but only felt that Xian Pei seemed very pitiful and adorable. Therefore, she decided to address him as a young prince. "Rank 13th prince." Zhang Ruan answered. "How does Miss know?" Lu Zhu asked in astonishment. Nevertheless, Xian Pei glanced at Lu Zhu, and seeing this, that palace maid hastily tried to curry favor and spoke up. "This servant sees that His Highness, 13th Prince, seems to like Junju a lot." Zhang Ruan coldly swept a look at her as her tone abruptly turned cold with a snap. "Kneel." The palace maid jumped in fright, and Zhang Ruan's gaze that landed upon her made her feel as if she had fallen into the ice. Thus, without a word, she knelt down. Lu Zhu looked at her in disdain. Earlier, they had all seen it clearly. At a glance one would understand that this palace maid was the personal maidservant of 13th Prince. However, she did not know how to protect her master at all. It was fine not to bring up the matter of allowing that unruly and overbearing Princess Hei to have slapped her own young master. She had even constantly nodded her head and bowed in obedience to gain her favor. One feared that she had never put her own master in her eyes. As a personal maidservant, this was truly a huge offense. Fengzai Yanli. To pay attention to / to care about / to attach importance to. Here it means that her young master has little worth to her. Zhang Ruan spoke to her with indifference. "This is how you have attended to the 13th prince." The palace maid froze in shock and immediately knocked her head down on the floor. "Junju, please spare me." This servant does not dare to do so anymore. This servant knows her mistakes. Junju, please have mercy. Lu Zhu looked at her curiously with wide eyes. For her to fear Zhang Ruan in such a manner, it was as if Zhang Ruan was truly a horribly terrifying person. I will not punish you. Zhang Ruan replied duly. However, starting from today, should 13th Prince suffer any mishap, you do not need to live anymore either. There is a palm imprint on his body, then there ought to be 1,000 of those on yours too. If he suffers one injury similarly, you should receive 1,000-fold. In spite of her light tone, the palace maid, for some unknown reason, could not help but shiver and felt that from her words, she could even hear the voices that came from the depths of hell. After staring blankly, she startled and understood. She immediately and vigorously kowtowed in front of Zhang Ruan. This servant thanks Junju for the reminder. Zhang Ruan then glanced at the child who had constantly been sneaking glances at her. Xianpei stared and shyly gave her a smile. Those moist and bright eyes made her heart soften, and she wanted to rush forward and pull him into an embrace, just like how she had done in her past life. However, in the end, she merely took out a small, green porcelain bottle from her row. This was the medicine given to her by Xiao Xiao the last time she had been hit by Jiang Quan. She stuffed the medicine bottle into Xianpei's hands and instructed the palace maid beside him, remember to apply this to His 13th Highness once daily. She then paused and reminded, remember what I just said. Hastily, the palace maid nodded whilst her heart was filled with misgivings and rejoicing. She did not know why Hong and Junju would be this broken-hearted for 13th Prince. Though if she had taken an interest in him, she had never initiated any intimate gestures towards 13th Prince before. In fact, it looked as though they were strangers. Similarly, Tianzhu and Lu Zhu both held suspicions in their hearts, but Zhang Ruan did not give them any time to ponder over it as she commanded the palace maid, take 13th Prince back. The palace maid hurriedly bid farewell to Zhang Ruan as she brought Xianpei with her to leave. Xianpei had been holding onto the palace maid's hand as he walked further away, but he could not resist looking back at Zhang Ruan with his tiny figure seeming exceptionally pitiful. Since you helped him, why did you treat him in such a cold and indifferent manner? A deep and low male voice emanated from behind her. Zhang Ruan turned around and saw Lu Min dressed in green court robes. She did not know how long he had been standing there, but it seemed as though he had only waited until this moment to appear and speak up. Tianzhu frowned imperceptibly. She was someone who studied martial arts, and Lu Min's efforts to remain hidden was not particularly brilliant. She had long since noted his presence, but as he was slow to reveal himself, she had assumed that it was either one of the palace eunuchs or a maid eavesdropping. Thus she had never thought it could have been him. Lu Min and Zhang Ruan's relationship was rather delicate, and Tianzhu was naturally inclined towards her own family's young master. Thus she was not very welcoming towards Lu Min. However, when Lu Min saw Zhang Ruan turn around, he was slightly startled. His impression of Zhang Ruan had always been bright red clothes that were lively and spirited. Yet, what he saw her dressed in today was an unprecedented outfit in green. Lu Min himself was fond of the color, and moreover, with Zhang Ruan dressed in a similar shade, it seemed like they were dressed the same. He could produce magnificent essays and come up with outstanding national policies, yet, he did not know how to converse with this lady before him who was once someone he considered as an intimate friend. It was as if no matter what he said, Zhang Ruan would remain indifferent and unfazed. Lu Zhu rolled her eyes as she made a sweeping glance over Lu Min's appearance and thought to herself, to think this person was the Grand Tutor, why was he blessed with the looks of a bookworm and seemed foolish? Yet Tianzhu furrowed her eyebrows. Her master did not like this Lu Min getting close to Zhang Ruan. Of this matter she was absolutely certain. In the genie guard, many were hoping for young foreign to be part of their family. How could she just be taken away by a mere grand tutor? Moreover, with the insight of a personal maidservant of her mistress, she could tell that Zhang Ruan's personality was one that a grand tutor who only knew of national policies and essays could not handle at all. How could Grand Tutor Lu, who was lacking the strength even to truss a chicken, a weak man, possibly protect Zhang Ruan? Finally Tianzhu murmured, "Miss, much time has already passed. Over at the Empress Dowager's palace." Zhang Ruan nodded and smiled towards Lu Min. "Grand Tutor Lu, I still have to go to Ci Ning Palace. I will bid my leave first." A flash of disappointment appeared in Lu Min's eyes. Since this is so, I will take my leave as well. Zhang Ruan turned around in the opposite direction of where Tianju was facing and walked forth. Standing behind her, Lu Min stood there for a while as he somewhat vexedly swatted his head. Then he left moodily. When she reached Xianing Palace, once Yang Gugu chanced upon Zhang Ruan's figure, only then did she let out a sigh of relief as she looked inside. Empress Dowager is somewhat unhappy today, Junju. Please do console her a little more. I understand. Zhang Ruan nodded. As she entered the room, sure enough, she saw Empress Dowager Ida leaning against the warm, thick divan that was engraved with an auspicious unbroken carving of all the 9 sons of the dragon, whilst her long ruby nails perfunctorily glided along the edges of the divan. The edges of the soft divan were made of wood from the agarwood tree, and as her nails scratched along it, it produced a light screechy sound. Empress Dowager Ida furrowed her eyebrows as she seemed somewhat melancholic. With a light smile, Zhang Ruan walked forward with extremely light strides. Upon hearing the sounds of her footsteps, Empress Dowager Ida turned around and was imperceptibly startled upon seeing Zhang Ruan. As if she had been immersed in a memory from long ago, her eyes hooded over in recollection as she spoke softly yet unconsciously. Yuan Rong. Imperial Grandmother. Zhang Ruan called out. As if she was snapped out of her reverie from Zhang Ruan's address, Empress Dowager abruptly collected her thoughts and helplessly patted her forehead. I have truly gotten old, my eyes are a blur as well. On the small table before her was a painting that had been spread out. At a glance the painting scroll depicted boundless prairies and the desert. The setting sun was gradually sinking into the horizon as streaks of blood-red sun rays shone all over the painting. There was also a group of camels leisurely passing in the distance, and one seemed to be able to hear the light hoofsteps of the camels walking by. Zhang Ruan lightly frowned. This painting was actually of South Xinjiang. Empress Dowager Ida noticed Zhang Ruan's gaze and let out a sigh as if she was weary to her bones without much strength to speak of more. Hong'an, accompany me and sit for a while. Zhang Ruan gently assented, yes. Chapter 136. The Golden Chrysanthemum Banquet. Chapter 136. The Golden Chrysanthemum Banquet. By the end of the day, Empress Dowager Ida had still not spoken a single word. A very perceptive Zhang Ruan felt that Empress Dowager Ida was harboring a secret, much like that baffling painting of South Xinjiang scenery. However, it appeared that Empress Dowager Ida had no intention of being forthcoming with her. In her previous lifetime, she had resided within the palace for many years but had never heard of Empress Dowager Ida having any secrets, so that would also mean that Xianli would not know. If there was any news, it would be concerning the war between Tianjin Kingdom and Great Jin. Initially, Great Jin had been advancing with great valor, and was on the brink of defeating Tianjin. However, it was not known what had gone awry for Tianjin Kingdom to suddenly recover and turn the corner. Not only that, but it was unknown where they had obtained the ability to be able to counter and push back Great Jin's latest advancement. Hence the war situation had once again reached an impasse. Naturally, Jiang Susu had taken delight in this matter, and took each and every opportunity to bring this up whenever she encountered Zhang Ruan. However, Zhang Ruan merely took her for a mad dog barking. Hence, after a few taunts that had merely resulted in a blasé reaction, Jiang Susu finally lost interest and ceased her prattle, turning instead to focus on the preparations for the upcoming Golden Chrysanthemum Banquet. The Golden Chrysanthemum Banquet was a social custom of Great Jin, held during the 7th month of the lunar calendar, when the chrysanthemum flowers were in bloom. It was hosted by the senior provincial officers Foreign, who invited the capital's coming-of-age young ladies for a gathering, while young gentlemen gathered on the other side to mingle, chat and establish connections. Although on the surface it looked like a mere social gathering, in actual fact it was more of a platform for various furins from the noble families to take a good look at potential daughter-in-laws or son-in-laws. While Great Jin's customs weren't that open-minded, there had still been a few couples who had met at the banquet and were later blissfully wedded. This in turn became a story that captured the fancy and imagination of many, and had spread far and wide. Zhang Quan had probably finally realized that he still had 2D daughters that were of marriageable age within his fu. Casting aside Zhang Ruan for the moment, Jiang Susu was still the pearl in Zhang Quan's palm, and he had every intention to seek out a good husband for her. For this occasion, He had invited the Marquis Xiaofu's eldest mistress, Shen Ro, to take Jiang Susu to the event. Xia Jiaojiao's portrait had also been sent to the palace, and so was no longer expected to participate in such gatherings. In the wake of Jiang Chao gaining recognition by Xian Li's side, Xia Cheng had come to a realization. Because the matter with Xia Yan was actually the fault of the Marquis Xiaofu, gradually the relationship with the Jiangfu began to improve, as if that incident had not happened at all. If Jiang Susu were to attend the Golden Chrysanthemum banquet, but Jiang Ruan did not, there would surely be many tongues wagging. Moreover, the invite from the senior provincial officers foreign also had Jiang Ruan's name, so she would also attend with Shen Ro. Though it was perceived that this Golden Chrysanthemum banquet was of some importance, surprisingly Jiang Susu seemed to have cloistered herself in her room without stepping out at all. Occasionally the sound of the qin could be heard coming out from Su Xian Yuan, and it can be said to be quite graceful and moving. The servants from Ruanju, however, didn't think much of it, especially when one considered the plight of Xia Yan, who was suffering in the secluded Buddhist hall while her beloved daughter still had the heart to go to these banquets. To think that in the past Xia Yan had looked out for Jiang Susu in all matters only to end up with such an ungrateful and thankless wretch of a daughter. Jiang Ruan did not spare a thought towards the banquet and continued her daily routine as usual. Seeing this, Tianzhu was rather relieved, knowing that her master's painstaking efforts were not in vain. Should this big white cabbage that he had carefully nurtured be snatched away by some pig, when master returned to capital, he would definitely have a fit. Cough. Of course Jiang Ruan was not a cabbage and master was definitely not. What in the world? The blistering heat of summer gradually tapered off like a tail, and in a blink of an eye autumn began. After the debilitating scorching of the noonday's heat of the past few days, the weather had now changed to be somewhat mild and pleasant. Occasionally there would also be a refreshing cool breeze, and those small earthen pots that were outside Ruanju were bursting with nameless small white daisies in bloom. Indeed, the Golden Chrysanthemum banquet was fast approaching. If it was anything like the banquets of the past, the Jiangfu would definitely be a buzzing hive of activity. Everything from top to bottom would be managed by Xia Yan. Old Jiang Madam would instruct on the proper etiquette. Second Yinyang would be rushing about procuring jewelry and accessories, and Hong Ying would be dressed in splendid fairy-like clothes. Jiang Li would be domineering and busy throwing her weight about, while Jiang Susu would be smiling with her ethereal otherworldly-like fairy look, a being far above the common folks. Jiang Dan would be timidly and cautiously seeking to curry favor. There was certainly no lack of womenfolk within the Jiangfu, with the whole household brimming with rouge, powder and lipsticks, and it depicted the endless flurry of gentle charming romanticism. Biu Shiren Jian Yan Hua. Lit. Not eating the food of common mortals / figure placing oneself above the common populace. Alas, the past was as fleeting and transient as flowing water, almost as if those alluring and beautiful images of ladies were but merely a whimsical dream of grandeur. Presently, the Jiangfu only had a Yinyang with a huge belly, but it seemed that she too had a change in personality. No longer did she spend time in idle chatter or petty discourse, but only concerned herself with the inconsequential matters. As for the rest, those that died were dead, those that had gone insane were insane. At present, the sprawling Jiangfu was like an empty vacuum, derelict, quiet and abandoned, leaving a sense of bleak desolation. The servants within the Fu were most perceptive about the changes, as it had only been a matter of a few short years before the Jiangfu had seemed to change over. Those that had grown up within the Fu had a vague idea in their hearts. Jiangfu had been full of splendor over the past 10 years, but maybe it wouldn't be long before it ended up like the Jiangfu's womenfolk, scattered like dust. Early in the morning, Jiang Ruan was served and groomed by Baiji and Lian Xiao. Today, even the gods were being benevolent. The warm sun was slightly peeking out, sending a light sprinkle of warmth over one's body, yet it was nothing like the scouring summer heat. The air was filled with a light refreshing breeze, just perfect for admiring flowers. Because the mourning period was still not over, Baiji could only dress Jiang Ruan in a lotus green dress, as Lian Xiao commented. Such a pity about the color of Miss clothes. If Miss could wear your usual vibrant red color, then no one would be able to outshine our Mississippi. Miss isn't going to a beauty contest, Baiji replied. Moreover, this lotus green still looks good and dignified. She was completely dressed when a maidservant came to notify them that Marquis Xiao's carriage had arrived, and was waiting outside the Fu's main door. Shenro was deemed to have arrived early to fetch them. Jiang Ruan had just stepped out when she chanced upon an unadorned and conservatively attired Jiang Susu. Recently Jiang Susu had stayed cloistered in the Fu, and while she had been fretful and impatient on most days, she lacked her previous forbidding harshness. Today, she must have taken extra care with her appearance. She was dressed in a uniquely designed soft silvery green gauze lily-like dress that accentuated her slender figure. Her long hair was coiled into a phoenix-like topknot, with a crystalline ruby hair pin inserted in a slanting angle. While it can be said that she was conservatively attired, she seemed to portray a distinguished ethereal refinement that was further enhanced by the significant improvement to her features by her previous beauty regime. Her every movement was like shedding off a layer of frivolousness and revealed a unique and incomparable charm. It was just like when she had always attracted others' gaze, and they would feel that she was truly like a fairy that had descended to the world from the highest of heavens. Seeing Jiang Ruan appear, Jiang Susu took a measure of her too. Since Jiang Ruan had not adorned herself in red for a long while, today she had picked a lotus green jacket with plain patterns of embroidered flowers. The lotus green color naturally was hard to pull off, but set against her skin she seemed even fairer. With her gorgeously splendid facial features, the dignified color added on another layer of royal nobility that no one else had. It seemed as if she had been ordained to be respected by the heavens, as if she was born to be an aloof and remote princess. As Jiang Susu looked on, a deeper layer of hatred gradually gathered in her eyes. Really, this could not be blamed on Jiang Ruan. When Empress Dowager Ida had the Imperial Household Department make clothes for her, she would often have some made for Jiang Ruan as well. Naturally, one need not mention the quality of the clothes made in the palace for a Junju. Although Jiang Quan had quite a number of good things on hand, it still would not compare to a tribute from the palace. In addition to that, Jiang Ruan had stayed in the palace for many years in her last life, and her every comportment would instinctively be affected by the habits she had gained there. One would not be able to learn these habits in such a short time frame, and since others would not know of this past of hers, they could only say that she was naturally graceful. As the corner of the curtains on the horse carriage was lifted open, Shenro smiled. "These two young ladies, will you not enter the carriage?" Jiang Ruan did a sweep of it and noticed that there was another person inside. She was faintly startled, and once she boarded the carriage, she then realized that the person was not anyone else but second mistress of the Xia family, Yuya. Back then, the reason why Marquis Xiaofu and Jiang Fu had become mutually hostile was because of Xia Jun. When the incident happened, Yuya hated Jiang Susu to death. But the people of the Xia family were not fools either. They had only needed to think a little before they knew who had arranged it. Although Xia Jun had been unable to enter officialdom because of her, for Yuya to not have her killed was already very telling of her forbearance. Shenro looked at Jiang Ruan, then at Jiang Susu, and covered her lips in muffled laughter. "Minister Jiang is truly blessed. These two young ladies are truly like jade flowers." "That's right," Yuya said unexpectedly. "Now that I see Junju, she looks even more elegant than 3 years ago." Jiang Ruan lightly smiled and did not reply as she looked differently at Yuya. These two mistresses of the Marquis, Xiaofu, eldest mistress Shenro, was a tiger with a smiling face and portrayed a gentle and amiable appearance to one and all. She had good looks too, however. One just needed to have one look at Xia Jiao to know what kind of appearance this eldest mistress had privately. On the other hand, second mistress Yuya was harsh and scathing, and the second master Xia had a dissolute reputation outside. If this second mistress had not borne him a son, then one would fear that the second master Xia would have long since given her a divorce document to dispose of her. If one had said that these complimentary words had come from Shenro's mouth, then it naturally would not be a problem. However, these had been spit out of Yuya's sharp and unkind mouth. Moreover, Yuya and her were getting along like oil on water. In the end, it really was too strange. Once Yuya noticed Jiang Ruan's eyes on her, she then shifted her gaze to Jiang Susu. "Today, second Miss Jiang will definitely astound everyone present with her splendidness." Jiang Susu laughed softly. "Second aunt has praised me too much." Jomu, wife of mother's brother/aunt/maternal uncle's wife. The whole journey to the senior provincial officer's fu was uneventful, and once they stepped down from the carriage, They were welcomed by the servants waiting at the entrance to usher them in. The servants led them in, and in the main hall, there was a congregation of furins and mistresses seated, while all the young ladies were in the garden admiring the chrysanthemums. This senior provincial officer's furin had a love for flowers, and within the residence a large piece of land was set aside just for a floral garden. It was sufficiently spacious for the young people to mingle and chat with one another. It was just that the young men were in the west garden and the young ladies were in the east garden. If they intended to secretly rendezvous, no one would bat an eye. As long as they did not do anything that overstepped the proper etiquette, bystanders would just feign ignorance, especially in this era of young people who were much more lenient and indulgent. Senior provincial officer's furin rose from her seat to welcome them, and when her gaze fell on Zhang Ruan, her eyes couldn't help lighting up. Hongen Junju, your comportment is truly blessed by heaven. It really makes one envious of Zhang Darren. And just like that, Zhang Susu was casually ignored, and immediately anger welled up in her heart. She had also noticed that the majority of the people within the main hall had their eyes affixed on Zhang Ruan, and found it somewhat suspicious. She was beginning to doubt her charm. Otherwise, why weren't people even looking at her but transfixed on Zhang Ruan instead? What she didn't realize was that while her charm was effective on men, those seated here were officials' furins, who only cared about who was more beautiful or good-looking. Zhang Ruan was currently Hongen Junju, and backing her was the General Fu. On top of that, she has an outstanding brother who was a god of war. Thus those seated furins with sons were mentally calculating if there was an opportunity to take Zhang Ruan home as their daughter-in-law. Zhang Ruan was naturally gifted with dignified disposition, and even though she was born with such exceptional beauty, her noble air was more than capable of suppressing her beauty. This in turn gave Zhang Ruan an impressively imposing demeanor. When these officials' furins were selecting a daughter-in-law, beauty was a secondary matter, and even if Zhang Ruan were to be lacking in looks to these furins, she was still in high demand, like fragrant hotcakes. It would seem that the senior provincial officer's furin was aiming for this outcome, as she had 2 sons. Her sons were about to reach their prime, and it was almost time for each of them to find a wife. The more she looked at Zhang Ruan, the more she found her very pleasing, and was about to warmly engage in further conversation when a voice spoke up from behind her. "Ruan Mimi, I've been waiting for you for a long while already." Zhang Ruan lifted her eyes and noticed Zhao Jin approaching her and giving her a wink. Zhang Ruan nodded her head in acknowledgement as Zhao Jin took her hand and turned to address the senior provincial officer's furin. "Furin, Zhang Ruan and I will head to the garden to admire the chrysanthemum flowers. Ruan Mimi has not even seen the beautiful chrysanthemums yet." Whatever the senior officer's furin was about to say was stuck in her mouth, so Shunro chuckled and acted as a mediator, saying, "I was just about to have a word with furin, so let these young ladies head to the garden to have some fun. Suer, you might as well go along with them too." Yuya knitted her brows and glanced at Zhang Ruan, then decided that it was best to stay by Shunro's side. Jiang Susu smiled too. "Okay." The 3 of them headed out of the main hall together before Jiang Susu spoke to Zhang Ruan. "I'm sure De Jiejie and Miss Zhao have much to talk about, so Sun Yang will go on ahead by herself." She really did not want to hang around Zhang Ruan any further, otherwise Zhang Ruan would outshine all her brilliance. How could she tolerate that? Moreover, she was thinking of heading to the West Garden to check out those young men. She was not convinced that with her beauty and charm she would not be able to have those men fall at her feet. Watching Jiang Susu's retreating back, Zhao Jin was rather perplexed. "Isn't that the direction towards the West Garden? What is your second sister thinking of doing? You don't have to bother with her." Zhang Ruan replied. "AI, aren't you afraid that something might happen and have people turn around and criticize the Jiangfu?" Zhao Jin was unable to comprehend. If she had gone out with her brothers, her parents would exhort the brothers in earnest, saying that when they are out and about, they are representing the Fu and its prestige. So they should at all times be vigilant and not do anything that would besmirch the family's name and cause ridicule towards their Fu. Zhang Ruan merely smiled. Zhao Jin's life was sincerely upright. If the Jiangfu were to lose its prestige because of Jiang Susu's actions, it would actually be a good thing. She would be crazy to volunteer to help pick up her carnage and help the Jiangfu protect its prestige. Seeing Zhang Ruan's indifferent response, Zhao Jin also decided to drop the topic at hand, but looked at her. You are rather relaxed, and speaking of which, we have not seen each other in quite some time. I really wanted to speak with you. She turned to look around. Do you really want to see the chrysanthemums? Speaking of chrysanthemums, a fleeting look of resignation flashed across Zhao Jin's face. She was a daughter from a general's family, so naturally she had no interest in love for flowers and plants, and she also didn't hang out with those coming-of-age young ladies, gossiping and commensurating. As for the flock of young ladies that were vying for favor and beauty in the name of admiring flowers, they were truly giving her a headache. If it weren't for her mother's insistence that she come to the event, Zhao Jin would never in a million years have done so. Zhang Ruan took in her facial expression and immediately knew what she had been thinking. She couldn't resist smiling as she replied, "Don't want to." "That's great, because I don't want to either." Upon hearing her reply, Zhao Jin was overjoyed. "I just know that Ruan Mimi is of the same mind as myself. Let's go. Let's find a quieter spot to have our conversation." In saying so, she held Zhang Ruan's hand and led her away from those admiring chrysanthemums. Zhao Jin said to Zhang Ruan while walking, "It's been ages since I last saw Yinger, and a few days ago I bumped into Dong Foreign, and she said that Yinger was ill and wasn't able to go out in case she catches a cold. Don't even know if she is better now." Zhang Ruan lowered her eyes. Dong Foreign had indeed hidden the truth about Dong Yinger. Even the fact that Dong Yinger's portrait that had been sent into the palace for selection was also kept a secret. Zhao Jin was still a little puzzled when she talked about this matter. How did she fall sick so unexpectedly? "I heard that third young Master Chang's engagement to Yinger has also been dissolved, and I had initially thought that it was because the Chang family despised the fact that Yinger was frail. I was even thinking of going personally to find Chang and to hear what he had to say about the matter. But then I heard." Zhao Jin usually had a flamboyant and direct personality, but when she had spoken to this point, she suddenly held her peace, as if she had said something rather inconceivable. Lifting her eyes to look directly at Zhang Ruan, she then noticed her doting smile, so she subtly probed askance, "You already know." "I know. Dong Foreign sought me out for a chat, hoping that I could dissuade Yinger Jiejie to not put her heart on something that was unrealistic and impossible." Zhao Jin sighed. "Yinger and I, along with the others, grew up together. Her heart is simple and she doesn't understand much, but Ruan Mimi, do you know the person in Yinger's heart?" Zhang Ruan smiled. "I don't know." Zhao Jin lamented. "I only hope that she will snap out of it soon. Then there is Fei Fei. Her family has also chosen and decided on the marriage engagement, so they are to wait till after the new year before she can be married off. It can be considered a well-matched arrangement, as he is a general from the capital. When Fei Fei was also from a military family, and at present was of marriageable age, Zhang Ruan asked, "How's Lin Jiejie?" Zixiang Zhao Jin grinned widely. "She still has her brusque character. Actually, she was supposed to come today, but she had a huge argument with Lin Darren. She was adamant that she could not blindly follow those pedantic constricting rules, so regarding finding a suitable partner, it has to be someone that she has set her heart on." Hearing this, it actually conformed to Lin Zixiang's personality and worldview, that she would offend and oppose the world if it weren't on her terms. So it looked like Lin Darren would have to suffer many headaches on her behalf. Both of them soon arrived at a quiet place when Zhang Ruan asked, "Zhao Jiejie, have you ever thought about looking for that someone?" "Me?" Zhao Jin shook her head. "I am nothing like those cloistered young ladies, wanting a husband and settling down, staying within the home all day fluffing over the trivials and trifles. My wish is to be like my father and brothers, entering the battlefield, protecting the people of the great Jin dynasty." This was not something that most young ladies would speak about, except for Zhao Jin, whose character and temperament had been cultivated by her father and brothers who had raised her just like another boy. Hence she bore a haughty chivalrous air. Zhao Jin seemed to have suddenly thought of something, and her demeanor turned dark. With a shake of her head she asked only. Zhang Ruan lifted her eyes to engage her. Zhao Jin thought for a moment before leaning in close to her. "Ruan Mimi, you and I are kindred spirits, so I want to share a secret with you and you are not to tell another soul." Zhang Ruan nodded. Tianjin Kingdom collaborated with South Xinjiang, and South Xinjiang sent reinforcements. Therefore recently the war has turned for the worse. The emperor issued a mandate and has indicated that he will send reinforcements. Zhao Jin edged closer to her ears and whispered, "My father received the emperor's secret edict and will head out to battle in the next few days. Tianjin is remote and spread out. I am really afraid that something will happen." Zhang Ruan's heart froze. Zhao Jin had already released her and she looked afar in a gloomy expression. "All I have is my martial arts skills. I can also participate in the battlefield, but I can't help share this burden with my father. I'm rather ashamed of myself." Just as Zhang Ruan was about to offer words of comfort, suddenly they heard a peculiar sound coming from the depths of the quiet peach forest in front of them. The sound was feeble, and if it wasn't for the fact that at just that moment Zhao Jin had also lowered her voice to a whisper, it was most likely that the sound would have been inaudible. Chapter 137 A Scheme Within the Forest. Chapter 137 A Scheme Within the Forest. Zhao Jin was from a martial arts family, so her hearing was much more acute when compared to Zhang Ruan, hence she was able to pick up on some movements. She gave Zhang Ruan a look and gestured with her hands, as she silently walked forward. Zhang Ruan indicated for Tianju to stick by Zhao Jin's side as a precaution should anything happen, while she also trailed behind. The group put forth much effort to lighten their footsteps, and just before they got to the forest edge, they heard a coquettish female voice reprimand, You're shameless." Another voice immediately replied, and it was a male. The voice seemingly embodied an element of anger and chagrin. Perturbedly he stated, "You are the one who's strange, otherwise why would you undress right before me?" Utterly without any sense of shame. Zhao Jin exchanged looks with Zhang Ruan before carefully parting the dense foliage hindering their view. What they saw were a man and a woman with their backs to them. The man seemed to be a young man who was attending today's Golden Chrysanthemum banquet, and going by his attire, he should be one of the aristocratic young masters. The woman was an unfamiliar stranger. Her clothing was askew and had been pulled off of her shoulders, revealing her fair skin. She cut a rather sorry figure. That's Gua family's fifth Miss, Gua Meng, and his assistant minister Gua Shu's daughter. Zhao Jin leaned close and whispered into Zhang Ruan's ears. Today she accompanied her elder sister to the event. "You," that fifth Miss Gua voice hitched with the sound of impending tears and misery. "You've both dishonored me and spat such words at me. I will not be able to face anyone now, I might as well die." So saying, she stood up and set forth in an attempt to ram her head into the tree. The young man was so startled that he immediately stretched out his hand to grab hold of her, and was almost crushed into the tree by her forceful movement. Hurriedly he said, "There has to be some kind of misunderstanding. Our Zhao family men aren't the kind of shameless and irresponsible people that you speak of." He turned around, revealing a familiar face that the people hidden behind the trees were able to recognize. He was indeed the Zhao family's third young master, Zhao Feizhou. Zhao Feizhou was a young lad in his teens, and at the moment his face was flushed. However, his face did not indicate any guilty expression, just a harried indignation. Zhao Jin seemed to have seen through the farce and gave Zhang Ruan a nudge. "Ruan Mimi, there is something fishy about this scene." Zhang Ruan arched her brows because obviously there was something fishy about it. That fifth Miss Gua had been continuously harping on the fact that Zhao Feizhou had dishonored her, but even until now, there had been no attempt on her part to tidy her attire. If it was any young maiden from a good home, surely she would have quickly covered herself up if she had just been dishonored. This young lady sure was something else altogether. It was as if she was afraid that everyone would miss out on seeing her exposed skin. Amongst the three young masters of the Zhao family, Zhao Yi was the calm and determined one, and Zhao Yulong followed Zhao Yuanping's temperament and resourcefulness. However, this Zhao Feizhou had not inherited Zhao Yuanfeng's cunning, but had instead only inherited his father's impetuous irritability and temper. Moreover, he was not the scheming type. Therefore, if someone really wanted to plot against the Zhao family, it would be strange if they didn't find Zhao Feizhou. Zhao Feizhou was only about 17 or 18 years old and was at the age when he could take a wife, but this fifth Miss Gua, who was only a Shu daughter, was way out of her league if she wanted to associate with the General Fu. However, should Zhao Feizhou have dishonored her, then a marriage was unavoidable even if he didn't want to marry. Still, he would have to marry her, and Guameng would have obtained what her heart desired. It's just that. How could a Shu daughter show such audacity? Immediately a harsh-looking face appeared in Zhang Ruan's mind. Third young master Zhao, are you thinking of shirking your responsibility? Guomeng began to sob. I only intended to accompany my elder sister to attend today's golden chrysanthemum banquet. But who would have thought? She paused. Third young master Zhao, if you're unwilling to take responsibility, Menger's entire life will be utterly ruined. Then what is there to live for? And I may as well just resolve it all by ending this life. Zhang Ruan surveyed the surroundings and noted a small outhouse. Such houses that were usually built within a foos garden were usually used to relax and while the time away, and should visitors come visiting and were worn out from strolling the gardens, they would come to this outhouse that was in the middle of the forest of peach trees to rest and have a cup of tea. However, there wasn't a sign of any person there today, not even a maid in attendance. Immediately Zhang Ruan understood the situation at hand. Presently, fifth Miss Guo was crying and wailing, thus putting the simple and honest Zhao Feizhou in a difficult position. Which also meant that it wouldn't be long before an instigator would lead people to pass by and accidentally happen to witness this scandalous scene. In this way, Zhao Feizhou would not only completely lose his honor and face in the presence of these numerous noble madams and young ladies from the capital, but also the many government officials and gentlemen too. Both of the madams of the Zhao family were kind and gentle in nature, and no matter how much they would defend him, Zhao Feizhou, they would be heavily outnumbered with impossible odds. And then in front of everyone, if someone forced Zhao Feizhou to make his position clear towards this Guomeng would be able to enter the Zhao family smoothly in the future. If Guomeng really entered the general Fu, then the Zhao family would no longer have a moment of peace. Guomeng would definitely sow discord within the family and ultimately cause the utter destruction and extermination of the Zhaos. If this fifth Miss Guo were to enter the Zhao family under everyone's watchful eyes, and all because of Zhao Feizhou's wrongful behavior towards her, then she would be treated like a precious crystal, one that can't be beaten, can't be reprimanded. Based on Zhao Guang's temperament, without a shadow of doubt, he would be angered to the point that he would fall sick from it. Not only would this destroy Zhao Feizhou, it would add much stress to the Zhao family. To be able to gain so much at one fell swoop, it was hard for anyone not to be highly suspicious. Zhang Ruan collected her thoughts and asked, what's the background of this fifth Miss Guo? Zhao Jin was slightly taken aback before she quietly replied, Assistant Minister Guo's foreign is very ill, and possibly won't live past this year, and Assistant Minister Guo favors his concubine and neglects his wife. Guo foreign only has eldest Guo Miss as the daughter, while fifth Miss Guo was born from the concubine. Above her is an elder brother. These pair of siblings are tyrannical and oppressive within the Fu, and poor eldest Guo Miss has to deal with them on a daily basis. Just like today, Assistant Minister Guo allowed her to attend today's banquet. Otherwise, how would a Shu daughter have the right to attend the Golden Chrysanthemum banquet? Zhang Ruan's eyes hooded. Yet another man who favored his concubines and neglected his wife. This fifth Miss Guo sure had some gumption, but then, if you have the courage to do things, you must have the courage to bear the consequences. She reached out her hands to part the shrubbery when a stunned Zhao Jin stopped her hand. Ruan Mimi, what are you trying to do? I'll provide fifth Miss Guo with a witness. Zhang Ruan smirked. Guomeng and Zhao Feizhou heard some movement and immediately turned around. They were stunned to see Zhang Ruan. Zhao Feizhou had not seen Zhang Ruan for over 3 years, and upon facing this young lady's gaze, he had immediately recognized the exceptionally beautiful young lady in red, his own Biaomei. Fifth Miss Guo had not met Zhang Ruan before, and at the moment only saw an exceptionally beautiful young lady appearing before her that bore a noble and graceful bearing that she herself did not have. In that moment, there arose a feeling of envy and embarrassment within her. The one thing that really bothered anyone born as a Shu daughter was that they were considered second-class citizens and were not able to rise above their position. Guomeng was just like Jiang Su, if they met anyone who could belittle them, they would instantly become hostile and consider them as a foe. As she stared at Zhang Ruan, resentment and indignation flooded her heart. Who are you? This Junju happened to walk past, and just happened to come across a good play. Zhang Ruan smiled. Junju. Guomeng was flabbergasted. The young lady before her eyes had such bearing and presence, that even her own eldest D sister would fall short before her. If she was a Junju, wouldn't she be? She looked at Zhang Ruan, and immediately two trail of tears began to fall, begging Junju to make a decision on my behalf. Third young master Zhao has forcibly taken my innocence. Zhang Ruan nodded, okay. Zhao Jin and Zhao Feizhou were stumped. The former did not know what Zhang Ruan was planning to do, and the latter was very indignant. After all, Zhang Ruan was his own Biaomei. How could she side with a total stranger? Lu Zhu and Tianzhu were quietly standing by. They had been with Zhang Ruan for quite some time now, and they were very clear that the more Zhang Ruan was calm, the more it signified that someone was going to suffer. Guomeng seemed to be extremely embarrassed and covered her face as she sobbed. I was with my sister in the garden just ahead admiring the chrysanthemums and happened to notice a butterfly. In a moment of playfulness I followed it here. But who would have thought that I would meet third young master Zhao? Third young master Zhao and I engaged in a conversation, and then I twisted my foot, and when third young master Zhao supported me up, he knocked me out with some drugs, and when I woke up, she was not able to speak further, only to burst out wailing loudly. That's not what happened. Zhao Feizhou stomped in anger. It was you who twisted your leg, and out of kindness I supported you. Then you took your handkerchief to wipe my sweat, and the next thing I knew I fainted. When I woke up, I found myself here with you insisting that I had forcefully taken your innocence when in actual fact I did no such thing. Upon recalling this point, Zhao Feizhou became absolutely irate. Now that he had time to think about it, it was almost certain that that handkerchief must have had some drugs on it. There is no rationale to what third young master Zhao just said. It is implying that I purposely rendered you unconscious just so that you could defile my innocence. If this news were to be spread out, how would it benefit me? Guomeng was indeed clever and eloquent. Turning to face Zhang Ruan as she emphasized, Junju, you are highly principled and I am sure that you will make the right decision for me. Zhang Ruan knelt down and her eyes were leveled with Guomeng. Smirking, she replied, okay, I will make a decision on your behalf. Quietly she asked then, Miss Gua, did you really lose your innocence? This question sounded rather peculiar, and Guomeng looked at Zhang Ruan warily. Zhang Ruan smiled at her and her gaze was like a pool of clear glossy spring water, but on a closer look it seemed to look like a black maelstrom deep and bottomless. And should anyone seek to explore its depths, it was like a ferocious beast that was hiding in its depths just waiting to burst forth and swallow her in one go. Under such a gaze, Guomeng could not help a feeling of guilt and immediately lowered her head as she pleaded. Why would Junju ask such a question? After what has just happened, aren't I better off dying than living? I did not understand. Zhao Feizhou wanted to say more, but Zhao Jin shook her head pointedly at him. Zhang Ruan smiled as she stood up. Then Miss Gua should stop crying. We will arrange to have a matron come examine Miss Gua shortly, and if you have really lost your innocence then we will have third young master Zhao marry you. How's that? No way, I didn't even touch her. Without waiting for Guomeng to reply, Zhao Feizhou had already jumped up and retorted. Isn't Junju bringing disgrace upon me? A flash of panic flitted in Guomeng's eyes before it changed into the posture of one who had suffered a great disgrace and appeared ashamed and indignant as she voiced the question. That's not really the case, Zhang Ruan slowly responded. It's just that this feels very much like a misunderstanding. Since fifth Miss Gua is adamant that you've been forcefully defiled of your innocence, then there definitely ought to be some staining of virgin blood. However, this Junju has looked around the surroundings and has not noticed any red stain. Unless this is not the place that third young master Zhao has taken your innocence, and he carried you over here? Wouldn't that be overkill, unless it was to boast of Zhao Feizhou's great prowess? Washishianzu. Lit. Draw legs on a snake. Figure to ruin the effect by adding a superfluous / to overdo it. As soon as these words came out, all three people present were absolutely stupefied, and even Lu Zhu and Tianzhu, who were used to Zhang Ruan often doing something unexpected, could not help pursing their lips. Presently, Zhao Jin and Zhao Feizhou's thoughts were identical. Zhang Ruan had just casually discussed such an embarrassing topic in front of them. For an unmarried girl, she was able to speak of such matters in such a forthright and open manner. Moreover, she doesn't seem to feel any sense of embarrassment, nor was she shy about it, and in fact she was so undisturbed and calm that it caused everyone to be in awe. This had completely upturned her prior image of a genteel and indifferent daughter of a noble family. Zhao Feizhou's face had turned scarlet, almost as if he had been knocked unconscious from Zhang Ruan's blasé flippant dialogue. When his own Zumu and those aunts of his talked about Zhang Ruan, they would lavish her with praise and extol her qualities, saying that she was a model of propriety and her bearing was like someone who was brought up in those noble families. Who would have thought that her action would cause him to doubt if this was really the same well-bred Biaomei that his family had spoken of? On the other hand, Guomeng was totally rendered speechless by what Zhang Ruan had said. No matter how she calculated, she had not anticipated that Zhang Ruan would use such forthright words to stump her. Who would have ever imagined that out of a Juanju's mouth the words virgin blood would be uttered? However, virgin blood could not be faked, so if she really solicited a matron to check her, then she would have to suffer the consequences. Guomeng's face immediately changed, and she suddenly declared, "Does Junju have something against me? Why do you speak in such an insulting manner?" Qi Buliao Dozhizhou, lit. If you can't eat it all, you'll have to take it home / figure you'll have to take the consequences. Zhang Ruan's smile was gentle, without a trace that she had taken offense from her words, but rather she softly replied, "It wasn't meant to be insulting, it was for the sake of fairness. I can't be biased just because Miss Gua is a female. Moreover, third young master Zhao cannot suffer in silence. It's just like when one goes to the marketplace to buy something. It is expected that the person has to inspect closely if the goods are in good condition." She had just compared Guomeng to a commodity. Momentarily, Guomeng's pallor was drained of blood. In turn, Zhao Jin covered her mouth and guffawed. This was indeed her first time watching Zhang Ruan behave in a menacing and overbearing manner. Never had she expected that Zhang Ruan could be so eloquent that she could strip down fifth Miss Gua with just a few sentences, to the point that she could not be able to face others. Fifth Miss Gua does not have the proof of virgin blood. Yet you want third young master Zhao to take responsibility. Now that is way too bizarre. Either it could be that fifth Miss Gua is still a virgin and what had just transpired was merely a misunderstanding, or Zhang Ruan looked skeptically at her. Or is it that fifth Miss Gua is no longer a virgin? Zhao Feizhou was elated as he felt that Zhang Ruan was just like his second uncle. Both spoke in calm, gentle manner, but in actual fact was scolding the person in a twisted way, ultimately causing the person to be confused and perplexed. So no matter how Guomeng were to answer, she had already been set up. Frantically, Guomeng's eyes turned red and she was exceptionally angry. So what if she was a Shu daughter? She too had taken her pride and face to ensnare Zhao Feizhou, but ultimately she was not of marriageable age. She had not expected that she could be rendered totally speechless in front of everyone by Zhang Ruan's words, and was beginning to panic. And now if she had to admit that it had all been a misunderstanding, she felt rather disgruntled. But if it was as Zhang Ruan suggested and the matter of her having lost her virginity was exposed, even if she gained an upper hand, still others would look at her differently henceforth. In the end, Guomeng could not remain calm, and in her frenetic moment she asked, "Don't tell me that Junju is biased towards third young master Zhao because of your relations. This is too unfair. How could someone from royalty bully someone on a whim?" Zhang Ruan snickered and laughed as her eyes shone brightly as she stated, "I never mentioned that I was a relative of third young master Zhao, so how can you turn around and say as such?" Zhao Feizhou had to restrain his expression, while Zhao Jin also ceased her laughter. Zhao Feizhou might have an honest and straightforward personality, but he was not stupid. Upon hearing Zhang Ruan highlighting this point, he immediately understood that he had been set up by someone. He had also inherited Zhao Yuanfeng's temperament and was extremely volatile. Earlier on, he had thought it was merely a misunderstanding and had not done anything towards fifth Miss Gua. But now fury erupted as he strode towards her. "How dare you set me up? I really don't understand what you're implying." Guomeng realized that she had made a slip of the tongue, so she had no choice but to persist to the bitter end. While in her heart she was terribly upset. How could this Hongan Junju be so much more troublesome and difficult to deal with compared to what the rumors had purported? Just when she had almost succeeded today, somehow because of Zhang Ruan's manipulations, it was impossible to triumph. At this moment, she felt extreme hatred and anger. Placidly Jiang Ruan responded. Doesn't 5th Miss Gua not understand? How about I help you by explaining? Ruan Mimi, what is there for you to explain? Zhao Jin acted in concert with her. 5th Miss Gua. The men from the General Fu are all very outstanding and many of the capital's young D daughters hope to be able to marry into the Zhao family. But if anyone could make use of such botched and clumsy methods to scheme, I'm afraid that the Zhou family would already be overcrowded. What I just can't understand is where a mere Shu daughter would find the audacity and gall to aspire to enter the General Fu. Guomeng's heart skipped a beat as she raised her eyes to look at Jiang Ruan. She felt that this young lady wrapped within a lotus green jacket was obviously gifted with a complexion so bright like a flower in bloom, yet at the same time seemed to be shrouded in a layer of darkness that could eclipse the sun, almost as if she was a mystical demoness reborn from the white bones from the depths of hell, beautiful yet terrifying. Junju, this is all a misunderstanding. Guomeng made a prompt decision. As a Shu daughter, she had learnt within the Fu how to act pragmatically. Seeing that her well-laid plans were not coming to fruition, and that Jiang Ruan was no pushover, if she were to pursue any further, she would be the only person to suffer a loss. No matter how much Assistant Minister Gua doted on her, much more in comparison to the D daughter still, if he were to find out that she had offended Hong and Junju, she was sure that he would not let her off. Jianfeng Sherdua. Lit. See the wind and set the helm. Figure to act pragmatically / to be flexible and take advantage of the situation. The more she thought about it, the more fearful she felt. Reluctantly Guomeng smiled. There seems to be a misunderstanding between 3rd young Master Zhao and myself. Since the misunderstanding has been clarified, there is nothing much the matter, and it was all my fault for wrongfully accusing 3rd young Master Zhao. Allow me to offer my apologies to 3rd young Master Zhao. Zhao Feizhou was somewhat annoyed. As someone from a military family, he hardly had many opportunities to come into contact with females. Moreover, his mother and aunts were all kind and gentle by nature, so the household was always peaceful and tranquil. There wasn't any plotting or scheming against one another like those ladies from other Fu. So now that he had encountered such a shameless person, he was utterly stunned. So much so that he was left without any words of rebuttal. Zhao Jin also stated, 5th Miss Gua. This apology of yours appears to be without sincerity. Jiang Ruan looked towards Guomeng saying, you did not falsely accuse him. Zhao Feizhou was dumbfounded, totally unable to comprehend as he turned towards Jiang Ruan. At the same time, Guomeng also did not understand Jiang Ruan's meaning, and could only affix her gaze on her expression. Jiang Ruan blandly smiled. 5th Miss Gua. Hasn't anyone ever told you how dangerous it is to negate and run away after making a mistake? Guomeng's heart startled, intuitively sensing a bad premonition as she once again took in Jiang Ruan's expression. With nary a care, she immediately opened her mouth to holler. Tianju, knock her out, Jiang Ruan instructed. As soon as the voice fell, and even before Guomeng could let out a sound, all she saw was the maidservant who was silently standing behind Jiang Ruan leap up. Guomeng felt darkness covering her eyes and then she saw nothing more. Guomeng's body collapsed softly onto the grass. Zhao Jin knitted her brows while Zhao Feizhou asked, you, what do you plan to do? Jiang Ruan looked at the person on the ground. In future, I won't have much patience to come rescue you from your own foolishness. If you continue as such, the Zhao family will sooner or later be ruined by your hands. She laughed grimly. Tianju. Bring 5th Miss Gua along to watch a play. Chapter 138 Lured in by the Mistress of Misfortune. Chapter 138. Lured in by the Mistress of Misfortune. Zhao Feizhou was a strapping young man, and could have never anticipated that he would be belittled by Jiang Ruan today. At that moment he felt rather disgruntled. Meanwhile, Jiang Ruan instructed Tianju to deposit Guomeng at the side of an artificial mountain by the pond. As Tianju went about her task, she did not spare any effort in doing so. Thus Guomeng's head bumped into the artificial mountain and soon thereafter a trickle of blood flowed down. Although those present were momentarily startled, no one obstructed. As a norm, Zhao Jin utterly loathed anyone who would stab another in the back, as did Zhao Feizhou. Tianzhu took out a porcelain bottle from her robe and waved it in front of Guomeng's nose before standing up to announce, "Miss, she will not awaken for 4 hours." Zhao Feizhou scrutinized Guomeng for any movement and was rather perplexed. "Even your maidservant knows martial arts? Where did you find her?" Zhao Feizhou was himself trained in the martial arts, so it was obvious that he could make out that Tianzhu's technique was not at all inferior. Zhang Ruan looked in the distance when Lu Zhu, who had been sent to spread the news, came running back in haste. "Miss Xia family's 2 madams and a few other Furins are heading over here." Of course it would be the Xia family. Zhang Ruan's eyes shone. "That's good. Let us go elsewhere to avoid them." Just as she was done speaking, a group of people had just entered the forest and were led by the senior provincial officer's Furin. Shun Ro was engaging her in conversation while Yu Ye's eyes were scrutinizing the middle of the forest, as if she was searching for something. A maidservant of Yu Ye was walking at the front of the group before suddenly exclaiming in surprise, "It looks like there is someone over there." The Furins correspondingly shared the same flabbergasted expression. It sounded as if the maidservant had chanced upon something that was too embarrassing for words. A glint of delight flashed in Yu Ye's eyes, but she admonished in a serious manner, "Why are you calling out so irresponsibly? Don't you even know the proper etiquette?" "Second, Madame Xia, don't be so quick to admonish the maidservant." Senior provincial officer's Furin patted her on the arm as she turned to question the maidservant. "What's the matter? Why are you making such a big fuss over merely spotting someone?" The maidservant hesitated but then said nothing, only lowering her head. Upon seeing her expression, the Furins couldn't help their suspicion nor hold back from making wild guesses in their hearts. The Golden Chrysanthemum banquet was held especially for young ladies and gentlemen to mingle, and should there be anyone they found outstanding secretly. Generally speaking, most people were delighted to see such excitement, especially those from any young lady's family. However, the Furins were still worried about their family's young lady or gentleman being entangled or implicated in such incidents. As such, they were in a conundrum as they were caught between a rock and a hard place. On seeing the impasse, Yuya continued, "This maidservant is getting more and more insolent. I will go take a look to find out what has caused her to be this excited." Then, after speaking, she took the initiative to head forward. With Yuya taking the lead, the other Furins had no reason to linger behind and followed in succession. Shunro swept a thoughtful look at Yuya. Then the corners of her lips stretched out to reveal a smile showing great delight. However, when everyone walked to the front, they were shocked by the sight in front of them. They saw a female reclining on the artificial mountain by the pond, her attire still appropriate and intact. It was just that there was a blood stain on her forehead, and she presented a shocking and ghastly sight. Assistant Minister Guo's family Ru Mei Yinyang instantly shouted in alarm, "Menger!" Assistant Minister Guo's Furin was presently lying in bed suffering from a serious illness, and as such wasn't able to attend the banquet. So it was left to the Yinyang, who had given birth to the Guo young master and young lady, to bring them all to the Golden Chrysanthemum banquet. This particular Ru Mei Yinyang of Assistant Minister Guo's was originally a songstress from a theatrical troupe, and was accustomed to fawn and curry favor with the young masters in a shady manner. Today, she was dressed colorfully in ostentatious attire, and the ornaments on her head were overtly dazzling and eye-catching. If one didn't know better, one would think that she was looking for a husband for herself and not for her daughter. Many of the Furins present were main official wives, and while there were also a few concubines, they were all dressed modestly in light colors. There was no one else that was dressed in such a frivolous manner. Ru Mei Yinyang had already been relegated to the cold bench and hadn't been too happy about it, but upon seeing that her daughter was involved in an incident, she cast all of that aside and quickly ran forward to embrace Guomeng in her arms. Once she noticed the gash on Guomeng's forehead, Ru Mei Yinyang began to rain curses abusively. "What kind of demon's drug is this to have harmed my Menger? For no rhyme or reason, her name has been tarnished. In the days ahead, how can she even get married?" Her voice was shrill and coarse, causing the other Furins to frown, but Ru Mei Yinyang was totally oblivious to her surroundings as she pointedly addressed the senior provincial officer's Furin sharply. "It is here in Furin's Fu that my Menger has met with a mishap, so Furin must find that nasty vile person and punish him severely. Just wait until I find out who that person is and watch me rip the skin off of him." After all, she was a lowborn and not raised with the nobility, so her words carried the shrillness of those shrews from the marketplace. Not only was her appeal offensive, she even had the audacity to be disrespectful to the extent of implicating senior provincial officers foreign in her tirade. While the senior provincial officer Fu would rightly take responsibility for the matter, the attitude and stance of Ru Meinyang was at present causing the sense of empathy those Furins had initially felt towards Guomeng to dissipate. Furin, don't be overwrought. It was Zhao family's second Madame Yaosher, who could not bear to watch the debacle any further, who finally stepped in. Why don't we attend to Miss Guo's wounds first? How could this mother's only concern be to reproach and slur, totally neglecting to see to her own daughter's wounds? As the Furins reflected on this point, they began to despise Ru Meinyang even more. Ru Meinyang might have her ways with Assistant Minister Guo, but in front of these aristocratic born and bred Furins, she was like a mindless fool. Even now, she was still unable to sense the change in the gazes that were upon her, only to now anxiously shake Guomeng in her arms. Menger. Guomeng's eyes remained closed and she was not responsive at all. This finally caused Ru Meinyang to panic and drop her vendetta, and anxiously ask, "What should I do? Menger isn't waking up? What could be the matter?" Yuya tightly knit her brows, while the maidservant who had earlier pretended to be flustered and embarrassed began to panic, dropping her head in fright. It wasn't supposed to be like this. How did it turn out this way? Earlier it had all been carefully laid out that when they all arrived at the scene, they would find Zhao Feizhou and Guomeng in a compromising position. Furthermore, Guomeng was supposed to have been crying in shame because Zhao Feizhou was not taking responsibility for the deed. How was it then that there was no sign of Zhao Feizhou, and Guomeng had suffered such a serious injury? In the past, Yuya had made inquiries and knew that Zhao Feizhou's character was explosive like his father, Zhao Yuanfeng, but he was also not one to hurt anyone without a reason. Moreover, the Zhao family's men weren't abusive to females. So what was with this situation? Only to hear senior provincial officers foreign say, "Servants, take Miss Guo to the house and take Master's invitation card to request for a physician." Even after the servants had placed a still unconscious Guomeng on a bed in a room, the physician had yet to arrive. Yuya rolled her eyes and said, "How daring of that person to hurt Miss Guo within the Fu. The culprit certainly has to be someone from within. There are many people who are here attending the Golden Chrysanthemum banquet, so there ought to be someone who might have noticed something. Why not ask around to find out who was with Miss Guo earlier?" The senior provincial officers foreign concurred with what she said, so she instructed someone to pass the message along asking if anyone had noticed anything today or knew who Guomeng had been with. The servant returned quickly and said that a servant who was sweeping the courtyard had earlier seen both Guomeng and Zhao Feizhou pass by together heading somewhere. When this was said, Yaosher's eyes twitched. Today she had brought Zhao Yulong and Zhao Feizhou to attend the banquet as both Zhao Yulong and Zhao Feizhou were of age to be married. Yet both were as stoic as a rock, blank slates without any thoughts of having any intimate relations with any young miss. Thus Yaosher and Zhousher had discussed it before deciding to bring both their son and nephew to this event. Who would have expected for such a thing to have happened? Yaosher had a scholarly family background and since childhood had been taught proper etiquette and decorum, so when she heard Zhao Feizhou being implicated, she was immediately indignant. "I have watched Feizhou grow up and am very certain that he could not have done such a despicable thing. You may know the child for a long time but still cannot know his true nature." Yuya stated, "Moreover, we haven't said anything, only that someone saw third young Master Zhao and fifth Miss Guo together. So what is there for Madame Zhao to worry about?" Yaosher was furious. She could see that Yuya was out to stir the pot, and when she glanced over at Shan Rou she suddenly recalled a certain matter. At that time Zhang Ruan's matter had spread to the Zhao family, and it turned out that this woman was the mother of Xia Jun. So today's incident was looking like an intentional provocation, a form of revenge. Ru Meinyang began to shout again, creating a ruckus and chaos all around. "So it was you. Who would have thought that third young Master Zhao is a shameless scoundrel? I could care less, but third young Master Zhao has hurt my Menger. I must return home to report this matter to Lei Oi. Then we will raise this matter to the courts. You will not be able to get away with it." Ru Meinyang, Yaosher was really irate at this point. With great emphasis, She clearly enunciated and drew out each word. Please explain why our Feizhou would hurt your family's daughter? Without any rhyme or reason for such an action, it definitely demands an explanation. Maybe your son fell for my Menger's beauty, and had some filthy wayward thoughts. Then when Menger refused his advances, he raised his hand in anger and hurt her. Ru Meinyang shamelessly said. And yet the Furens standing about chuckled at her words. This Ru Meinyang was certainly a shrew, without any care nor understanding of the repercussions that her spoken words would have on her daughter. Sadly, after today's incident had spread, in the future, Guomeng would have trouble finding a good family to marry into. If her own mother was so shameless, then as her daughter would she be any better? Ru Meinyang was gleefully carrying on with her tirade but was unaware of how defensive and protective the Zhao family were regarding their own, and were certainly no pushover. And although Yaosher might look warm and gentle, after being married into the Zhao family for so many years, some of the fierce and intrepid valor of the Zhao family had been ingrained in her very being. At that moment a cold laugh was heard. Ru Meinyang must be prone to jest. Feizhou has so many choices of young ladies to choose from, why would he choose a Shu daughter? Or does Ru Meinyang feel that because Miss Guo can sing a few songs, Feizhou must be enamored? How does she compare to Xiao Taohong from the capital's East Alley's theatrical stage? And who is better? Among the Furens present, those that were on good terms with Yaosher all knew that Yaosher was usually even-tempered and would never utter such biting sarcastic words. However, she had been forced to the point that her temper had flared. At Yaosher's words, even the senior provincial officers Furen felt an urge to laugh. The Xiao Taohong from that East Alley theatrical troupe could sing very well, and on a daily basis there was the welcoming and sending off many customers. Moreover, it was unknown how many officials were entangled with her. It can't be denied that Yaosher's words were malicious. Yuya herself had never thought that Yaosher, who looked easy to bully and a pushover, could be so witty and eloquent. The blockhead Ru Meinyang was also able to grasp the mockery and sarcasm in Yaosher's words, and felt so much hatred that she burned in resentment. Moreover, she did not possess Yaosher's wit and was thus unable to come up with a suitable comeback. Just when the situation was beginning to turn frosty, there was the sound of footsteps coming from outside. It was a group of noble ladies returning from playing out in the courtyard. Leading the group was Guo family's eldest Miss Guoxiang. Just as she stepped through the door, Ru Meinyang venomously began to reprimand, "Eldest Miss, how come when Menger and you went out to admire the flowers and play, something bad happened to Menger? Tell me, did you fulfill your role as eldest sister? Don't tell me that you didn't know that you needed to look out and care for your Mimi?" Eldest Miss Guo was only around 15 to 16 years old this year, and because her mother was very sick, she wore a dark green dress, and appeared very simple and unadorned. Her eyes were like the rest of her features, quiet and plain. After listening to Ru Meinyang's venomous reprimand, she merely shook her head saying, "Inyang, I am not a worm in fifth sister's stomach, so how could I have eyes on her all the time? Moreover, I requested fifth sister to accompany me but fifth sister herself turned me down." Ru Meinyang was shocked, only to see another young lady come forth from behind Guoxiang. That's right, Guojieji planned to head out together with fifth Miss Guo, and who knows why, but not only did fifth Miss Guo refuse to come along with Guojieji, but even insultingly abused Guojieji. The other noble young ladies began to nod their heads, claiming that they too had witnessed the event. To begin with, these young ladies did not have any regard for a Shu daughter, and on top of that, Guomeng's character was not one that invited any good feelings. So in sympathy towards Guoxiang, they did not leave it to chance and trampled on Guomeng. Ru Meinyang was so angered that she almost vomited blood, but there were so many noble ladies present and she could not afford to offend the nobility, so she could only continue to direct her intense fury upon Guoxiang, staring daggers at her. Guoxiang remained stoic, however. It was Yuya's gaze that began to sweep around before it landed on Zhang Ruan, who was standing towards the back with Zhao Jin. As if sensing Yuya's gaze, Zhang Ruan returned her gaze and smiled at her. Immediately a foreboding premonition arose in Yuya's heart, and she couldn't help feeling that she had overlooked something. "Inyang, someone has to be the culprit of fifth sister's injuries," Guoxiang stated. "What? Upon hearing this, Ru Meinyang immediately asked a question in return. Do you know who it is? This? Guoxiang felt awkward, but it was Zhao Jin who spoke up. It's because fifth Miss Gua stumbled upon another person's secret. What secret? Ru Meinyang asked doggedly, but Zhao Jin found it quite awkward to respond and refused to further comment. What in the world is this secret? Seeing Zhao Jin's reaction, Ru Meinyang felt even more anxious and she reached out to grab hold of Zhao Jin's sleeve. Zhao Foran frowned when she saw this. The young lady, who had spoken up on Guoxiang's behalf, once again spoke. Oh, everyone learned about it a while ago, so it can't be considered a secret anymore. This young lady was the daughter of a scholarly official, and she was still not of marriageable age this year. As such, she did not have any qualms about being straightforward and blunt with her words. The company of noble young ladies cast looks among themselves before lowering their heads. Their actions implied that this secret was something that was not easy to talk about and was too embarrassing to mention. Yu Ye's heart jumped as she looked towards Zhang Ruan. The smile on Zhang Ruan's face seemed to deepen, and no matter how one looked at it, there seemed to be something suspicious. She continued to pin her eyes on Zhang Ruan as her brows began to knit closer together. Just what is the matter? Senior provincial officers Foran gently coaxed. Just say it, there's nothing to be afraid of. The same young lady nonchalantly replied, all right, I'll just say it. The secret is that the Xia family's eldest miss is in fact the second Master Xia's child. Once this was uttered, everyone present was thunderstruck. Originally Shenro was like a fly on the wall watching the show being played out, but never had she imagined that the sudden shift of focus would suddenly land directly on her head. Immediately she turned ashen. What in the world is this? Yuya sternly questioned, as she cast her eye towards Shenro. She noted that Shenro's disposition was not like her usual self and her heart paused. Gradually she felt her heart sink, while an overwhelming hatred arose. As sisters-in-law, Shenro and her had fought for many years, and she very clearly understood the meaning behind Shenro's expression. It clearly confirmed what that young lady had said was true. When she had married into the Xia family, she was aware that Xia Tiankai was a philandering dandy. However, since she had given birth to Xia Jun, she had secured a firm place as the matriarch in the household. As such, no matter how much Xia Tiankai fooled around, he would always defer to her. In fact, Yuya was by nature a churlish person and always prone to jealousy. The eldest son of Xia family, Xia Tianyi, was wooden and unsophisticated. Yet he was able to marry a beautiful and pampered person like Shenro as his wife. Women were always prone to make comparisons, and she disliked the fact that Shenro had only given birth to a daughter but was still loved by her husband, whereas she had given birth to a son, and yet Xia Tiankai's heart was never towards her. The most hated fact was that occasionally Xia Tiankai's gaze would linger over Shenro's body in appreciation. Now that she thought about it, it was because there had already been some history between the two of them. It was no wonder then that even though it couldn't be said that Xia Tiankai was all that close to his eldest brother, he was always very doting of his niece Xia Jiao. Yet now it was clear that Xia Jiao was actually the fruit of their shared adultery. The elder brother-wife had an affair with the younger brother, and not only was Xia Tianyi wearing a green hat, he had even raised someone else's daughter. This was indeed the most ridiculous thing in the world. Why not let me explain, Zhang Ruan said nonchalantly. Earlier we were walking about when a maidservant came looking very flustered and in shock. All she could say was that fifth Miss Gua had stumbled upon a secret, and that a person had murdered fifth Miss Gua and was going to silence her too. That maidservant was very terrified, and when we questioned her further, she finally revealed the secret. This led to what we see now. Very good indeed, so it was you who hurt my Menger. Ru Meinyang was one to take advantage of any situation, so when she heard the explanation, she immediately turned her focus towards Yuya and Shenro and spat out. Both of you have done such scandalous and shameless deeds and even want to murder people to silence them. If my Menger suffers any mishap, my Leoi will not let you both off. Yuya took a deep breath. She was well aware that now was not the time to delve into all the other matters. This was because she was well aware that if such rumors were to spread concerning the Xia family, then this would not be a good thing for her. So she replied, Ru Meinyang, You don't even know where this maidservant came from, and yet you believed her words and jumped to conclusions. Isn't that too unfair of you? My sister-in-law and I have been here all this time, so did we leave our bodies to go harm Fifth Miss Gua? This? Ru Mei-nyang was dumbstruck. Jiang Ruan smiled. How come we haven't seen second Madame Xia's personal maid? Normally, any foreign who went out would always have 2 maidservants to wait on them, but until now, there had only been 1 maidservant by Yu Ye's side while the other was nowhere to be seen. Furthermore, if it was said that the maidservant was delayed in returning from retrieving something, then wasn't it taking way too long for her to return? Yu Ye's pallor changed. She knew where that maid went. That maid was meant to be hiding to then provide information that would lead Zhao Feizhou to Guomeng, but she had yet to return. So naturally she couldn't tell the truth. Unfortunately, Jiang Ruan had no intentions of giving her any time to react. Walking up to face Guomeng, who was still lying on the bed, she very gingerly pinched the edge of a silk handkerchief and quietly remarked, "This handkerchief seems to have something strange on it." Coincidentally, the physician who had just seen to Guomeng had just finished writing out a prescription, so he took the handkerchief from Jiang Ruan and had a whiff of it. "I've looked over this young lady and have concluded that she is not waking because she has been drugged. This handkerchief does in fact carry the scent of a sleep-inducing drug." Chapter 139 To expose a scandal. Chapter 139 To expose a scandal. Sleep-inducing drug? Ru Mei cried out. Then what is the cause of the wound on her forehead? This, the physician muttered to himself. It probably happened when she was under the influence of the drug and bumped her head somewhere. Or someone intentionally used something to hit her. Fortunately, the force was not that hard, so all she needs is to rest and apply some medication. She should be fine in a few days. Then when will my daughter wake up? Ru Mei asked. I'm not sure. The physician gave a cursory look at Guomeng, who was lying on the bed. We will have to wait until the effects of the drug wear off, and then she will naturally wake up. Senior provincial officers Foreign hurriedly nodded and offered her thanks before arranging for a servant to go with the physician to get the prescribed medication. Suddenly, the atmosphere came to a standstill. Jiang Ruan chuckled. Well, third young Master Zhao is a strapping 2-meter-tall young man, so it can hardly be said that he would actually bring with him a handkerchief to harm anybody. Moreover, it's obvious that there are flowers embroidered on the handkerchief, and no matter how you look at it, it obviously belongs to a girl. When those present heard this, they found the reasoning to be acceptable. Notwithstanding that a young gentleman like Zhao Feizhou would not randomly have on him a handkerchief, and upon closer look at the flowers and leaves embroidered on the fabric, it was undeniable that this was not an item belonging to a man. Ru Mei's eyes sharpened, and with a glance she could make out from the appearance of the handkerchief that this was indeed Guomeng's. Although she did not know why Guomeng's handkerchief was laced with a drug, with things as they stood, if she could shift the blame onto someone else, then naturally she would blame others. Marquis Xia's family could be said to be a meritorious family among the nobility, so there was a possibility to derive some advantage from them. Otherwise, Guomeng would have to solely and unwillingly suffer the consequences for no reason. Hence, Ru Mei immediately claimed, "That's right, who would have thought that second Madame Xia could be so vicious? This handkerchief must have been left behind by your servant." "Humph! Your servant used this handkerchief to knock my Menger unconscious and even thought to commit murder in order to silence her, thus throwing the dirty water onto third young Master Zhao. This most certainly is quite a calculated scheme." Both Shunrou and Yu Ye's expressions changed, Yu Ye's becoming even more aggravated. As it was, she had yet to recover from hearing about the matter regarding Shunrou and her husband. Never would she have thought that Ru Mei would further tangle her up in this kerfuffle. She furiously looked towards Jiang Ruan, because if anyone were to say that today's incident was totally unrelated to her, then even if she were beaten to death she would not believe it. Without a doubt Jiang Ruan must have hindered and manipulated the event. What a little cheap slut. Jiang Ruan smiled, both welcoming and returning her glare as her brows subtly lifted like a taunting provocation. Yu Ye felt as if blood was rushing to her head, and her voice involuntarily became shrill. Why would I have someone murder your daughter to silence her when the person who committed adultery wasn't me? I have not done anything that was shameful. In her extreme anger, she spoke these words from the depths of her heart. Her manner of speech embodied all her pent-up anger, causing the host of Furins and young ladies present to be shocked. Immediately their evaluation and expression towards both Shunro and her changed. Shunro was teetering on the verge of collapse. If what happened here today was to spread, the reputation of the Xia family would be utterly ruined. What awaited her was still unknown. The fact was that within the Great Jin dynasty, should a brother and sister-in-law from an official's family commit adultery, then the male would be unable to hold his head up in society forever, and the female would be drowned by being stuffed into a pig's wicker basket. Therefore, should all of this come to a head, then the rest of Xia Jiaojiao's life would also be ruined. Rumei was not one to be easily swayed, and immediately she smiled. Utilizing the skills learnt from the time when she was performing on stage, in her zealous shrewish voice she spoke, "Obviously you want to protect this secret. While you have not done anything, the scandal involves your husband. If this scandal were to be leaked out, then as a foreign your reputation would likewise be ruined. You plan to harm my Ming'er to cover up Xiaofu's scandal. Then I will definitely speak of this scandal. I will announce it so that everyone will know about it." As she spoke, she began to raise her voice into a shout. "Everybody listen up. In order to cover up Xiaofu's scandal, Second Madame Xia sought to murder my daughter to silence her. Second Madame Xia is a murderess. Xia family's eldest miss is actually eldest Madame Xia and second Master Xia's. Rumei was a songstress from birth, so she had a good breathing foundation that allowed her to shout that string of words without running out of breath. Moreover, her vocals were so loud and clear that she continuously repeated the gossip over and over until everyone in Senior Provincial Officer Fu heard the news. Those standing around were flabbergasted at the scene. Indeed, this Rumei totally disregarded her position, composure and decorum, spouting out whatever she wanted to say. Even though Yuya had seen all kinds of behaviors over the years, she had yet to encounter a foreign who did not do things according to conventional reasoning and morals. At the moment, she could not even remember to put a stop to the debacle. Those around were either surprised or found the situation hilarious. Zhao Jin had just about passed out from laughing so hard, and whispered into Zhang Ruan's ear, "What a star performer indeed. Those vocals are so moving that the audience is stunned." In the midst of all the shouting, Shunro's eyes rolled. Whatever inward or external prestige and status she possessed had all been lost today, so she might as well strike a pose and pass out. Her attending maidservants hurriedly supported her when they saw her faint. "Foreign, our madam has not been in good health and I'm afraid that she has fainted. Please can we trouble Foreign to let our madam enter the house to rest for a while?" Senior Provincial Officers Foreign agreed. So there was only Yuya left from the Xia family, and her heart secretly harbored great hatred towards Shunro's craftiness. She was actually silently elated with Rumei's cacophony. Shunro had done such a scandalous thing, that with all that hollering, for sure by tomorrow the whole capital would hear about it. Where would Shunro have any face to enjoy an easy life going forward? Seeing that Shunro had retreated into the house to hide out, she too was thinking how she could follow her act. However, Rumei had keen eyes, and while she was shouting, she also had her eyes pinned on any movement from Yuya. So when she saw her getting poised to faint, with quick steps she caught hold of Yuya's shoulder and proclaimed, "Second Madame Xia, you've harmed my Ming'er in such a manner. You better not turn around and fall out with us and then not own up to the matter. Why don't you come with me to the magistrate, because even if we end up at the court of law, you will not be found innocent." With Rumei viciously shaking her, even if she had wanted to faint, it was not possible now. Internally she was very annoyed that Guomeng would have such a relentless and stubborn person for a mother. To have someone cling and come right up to her face was definitely not at all sightly, and Yuya was beginning to become irate. At that moment, there was the sound of footsteps coming from outside, and a voice rang out, "Mother, are you all right?" At that moment, a group of young gentlemen entered one by one. Most probably they heard the ruckus and hurried over. Leading these gentlemen was a young man attired in a jade-white robe, a man that stood out among the men. His expression naturally bore the essence of intelligence, and on his waist was a paper fan. Anyone looking at him would see a man who was wise and astute, brimming with vitality. This was the Zhao family's second young master, Zhao Yulong. Zhao Feizhou followed closely behind Zhao Yulong, and immediately his gaze turned towards Zhang Ruan. Noticing Zhang Ruan's usual expression, his lips lifted into a smile. Turning his attention towards the other side, he noticed the downtrodden and dismal demeanor of Yu Ye and Ru Mei. He let out a sigh of relief and his posture relaxed. When Yaoshi saw that her son and her nephew had come over, taking note that there was nothing amiss with them, she was then able to put her worries to rest. Why did you come over? In her heart, she did not want her family's young masters to behold such a disgusting and awkward situation. Just thinking of what these people had originally intended, wanting to shift the blame onto Zhao Feizhou, her anger once again flared up. Zhao Feizhou and Zhao Yulong both noticed Yaoshi's anger, so Zhao Yulong replied, "We heard that there was some disturbance and were worried, so we rushed over. Hope all the Furins here will please forgive our intrusion." His attitude was refined and courteous, and he was such a handsome man that all the Furins and young ladies were happy just to behold his presence, so there was no way they would even think to criticize his actions. Seeing Zhao Yulong's stance, Yuya could not help but think of Xia Jun. She felt her heart ache as her gaze towards Zhao Yulong could be said to have turned malicious. Trailing behind the group of young gentlemen was a petite figure, dressed completely in a fluttering white dress. If it wasn't Zhang Susu, then who else could it be? Earlier, while all the young ladies were here, everyone's attention was on Guomeng's situation, so no one took notice that Zhang Susu was not with them. At this moment, seeing Zhang Susu entering behind these young gentlemen, everything became clear, and everyone looked at Zhang Susu with contempt. Looking at this second Miss Zhang's aloof and untouchable appearance, who would have thought that she was also restless and thus stealthily visited the young men today? Furthermore, it was one thing to secretly go observe the gentlemen, but to actually appear together with them left much to be said. Zhang Susu was nonchalant in front of all the gazes, and if she were to boast, she indeed had reaped quite a bit in returns. A few young gentlemen had already lost their hearts to her, and Zhang Susu couldn't help feeling rather pleased with herself. It was just that, even though these men were from aristocratic families, they were far below the person that she had set her heart on. Upon thinking about 8th Prince Xian Li, Zhang Susu felt a sense of melancholy overcoming her. It had been a long time since she last saw him. Since the Xia family was related to her, Zhang Susu frowned as she softly inquired, "Second aunt, did something happen?" Upon seeing Zhang Susu, Ru Mei was disdainful in her heart. This Zhang Susu was blessed with such beauty that she totally eclipsed her Guomeng. As such, her tone of voice was not pleasant, of course. "All of this is because of what your second aunt has done. If my Menger had not been fortunate today, she would have been murdered by this vicious and malicious Furin." Zhao Feizhou's eyes twitched, and he subconsciously looked towards Zhang Ruan. Earlier when Zhang Ruan had asked Tianzhu to knock Guomeng out, she had told him to hurry back. Zhao Feizhou was initially reluctant to leave, but he could not withstand Zhang Ruan's frosty disposition, so he had heeded and left. Zhang Ruan had instructed him to return and inform Zhao Yulong verbatim what had transpired. Once Zhao Yulong heard all that Zhao Feizhou had to tell, he mulled it over before instructing Zhao Feizhou to not tell a soul. It wasn't until they had heard the disturbance coming from the West Garden did Zhao Yulong pretend to be ignorant while rallying a group of gentlemen to head over to take a look. Zhao Yulong's eyes curved slightly as he looked towards Zhang Ruan, and when Zhang Ruan noticed his gaze, she responded with a faint smile. Zhao Yulong was Zhao Yuanping's son, so naturally Zhao Yulong had inherited some of his subterfuge. Therefore, he was most pleased with this Biaomei's way of handling matters. Both of them shared the same look of tacit agreement before averting their eyes elsewhere. Then one of the young ladies who admired Zhao Yulong quietly explained to him what had happened. After Zhao Yulong listened to her, he frowned and asked, "So the maidservant who was hurt and second Madame Xia's maidservant have not been found yet?" "They are looking for them," senior provincial officers Foreign said, "but it seems as if both of them have vanished." One of the young gentlemen from the group loudly proclaimed, "What is there to guess about? The maidservant was definitely sent to silence the person and also killed the maidservant who revealed the secret. Seeing that the situation was a failure, she immediately fled the scene, and that's why you won't find her. Once he said this, everyone was in agreement, as what he had said was highly possible, and an expected progression of the situation. Everyone began to look differently towards Yuya. Yuya became furious, as she had hoped the two maidservants would be found to prove her innocence, or at least they would prove that she did not arrange for anyone to harm Fifth Miss Guo. However, these two people had disappeared, and there were no traces of them to be found. She could not help looking at Zhang Ruan. Could it be that this was another one of Zhang Ruan's setups? The smile on Zhang Ruan's face had not faltered since the start of all of this. Moreover, the servant that had delivered the news could not be found anywhere within the whole of Senior Provincial Officer Fu. And that's because that particular servant was not even a servant. Jin-san may be an assassin, but she was also good with disguises. So much so that these young ladies would not even suspect a thing. As for Yuya's personal maidservant, it was obvious that she would forever be unable to return. At this point, Yuya felt like she was caught in the middle of a grand plot, with Ru Mei nipping at her heels and Guomeng unconscious from a sleep-inducing drug. She had intended to get the upper hand, but instead got trapped in an even worse situation. Feeling both anxious and furious, she could only tersely reiterate, "I did not order anyone to harm Guomeng." Unfortunately, no one believed her. Kihunangxia. If you ride a tiger, it's hard to get off. Figure impossible to stop halfway. Tujibuching Shabami. Lit. To try to steal a chicken only to end up losing the rice used to lure it/figure to try to gain an advantage only to end up worse off. With the situation momentarily at a standstill, everyone heard someone hurrying in to report. All that was said was that Marquis Xia requested Yuya and Shan Ro to immediately return to the Fu. Marquis Xia must have already heard the news for him to have someone come summon them. At the mere thought of Shan Ro's predicament, Yuya couldn't help feeling a sense of joy. It was just that Xia Cheng's temper was very terrifying, so she couldn't help worrying about the consequences she would have to endure herself. While Ru Mei looked like a shrew, she still had some wits about her. She knew that Xia Cheng was the true master of the Xia family, so angering Xia Cheng was not a good thing for her own Laoi. Today, before the company of Furins, Yuya had almost no room for denial. Also, Xia Fu couldn't run away because they were duty-bound to resolve this matter sooner or later. Therefore, with regards to this matter, the Xia family would assuredly give her a resolution. Since Xia Cheng was now aware of it, then there was nothing urgent at this point. Marquis Xia was in fact trying to maintain his Fu's reputation and face, and in an attempt to stave off criticism, he would definitely compensate her well. Peodiliashang Peobilio Mio. The monk can run away, but the temple won't run with him/figure you can run this time, but you'll have to come back/I'll get you sooner or later. Hence, Ru Mei took the opportunity to act as if she was heartbroken. Forget it. It seems as though Marquis Xia is already aware of the situation, since he is requesting the Xia family's madams to return. Moreover, I am not an unreasonable person. At present Menger still has not woken up, so I will wait for her. Then we can slowly talk over this matter. At that time, I hope that Marquis Xia will give Menger a clear response. Yuya once again welled up with anger, but she forcefully accepted her words before instructing the servant to enter the residence to inform Shan Ro. Shortly, a pale-looking Shan Ro followed the servant out. Then the two of them hurriedly took their leave from Senior Provincial Officers Foreign and fled in defeat. Now with completely downtrodden appearances, and the high-spirited display from when they first arrived gone, they had even forgotten all about Zhang Su and Zhang Ruan. However, it was also not appropriate for Jiang Su and Zhang Ruan to go to Xiaofu. After such a situation happened, and with it still being so early, Senior Provincial Officers Foreign was reluctant to let this perfectly good banquet be totally marred by such a ridiculous and absurd event. So she offered her apologies, requesting everyone not to take this matter to heart and continue with the flower appreciation and revelry. Everyone too was reluctant to ruin Senior Provincial Officers Foreign's pleasure, so they agreed in unison, but such a thing had already happened. How could it be the same as before? Therefore, when the conversations resumed, the discussions were not about the flowers, nor even about which lady or gentleman had caught their eyes, but instead it was about the scandalous secrets of Marquis Xiaofu. In all considerations, it was really an ideal topic for idle conversation. Because Guomeng had yet to wake up, Senior Provincial Officers Foreign had assigned someone to watch over her. Rume acted as if she had suffered a huge injustice as she kept on crying and wallowing in front of Senior Provincial Officers Foreign. Senior Provincial Officers Foreign was beginning to get agitated from having to continuously comfort her. And it wasn't until she had promised that Senior Provincial Officer Fu would also give 5th Miss Guo a good compensation that Rume relented and ceased her crying. Time flew past quickly, and in a blink of an eye the skies had turned dark and it was almost time for everyone to take their leave. When Zhao Jin mentioned this to Zhang Ruan, she shook her head. That Rume Yinyang is really one that cannot rise above her status. Even if she is a concubine, she shouldn't have taken matters this far. Hearing what she said to Senior Provincial Officers Foreign was exactly like those poor relatives who only come during harvest time taking whatever they lay their eyes on. Such short-sightedness in a person is really rare and unprecedented. Shaking her head, Zhang Ruan laughed, and coincidentally they saw the Zhao brothers, Zhao Yulong and Zhao Feizhou, coming their way. When they saw Zhang Ruan, Zhao Feizhou said, "Biaomei, eldest aunt has asked that you come with us in our carriage so that we can give you a ride back to Jiangfu." Yu Ye and Shenrou had quickly fled in defeat, but she and Jiang Susu still needed to return to their fu. Zhang Ruan nodded. Zhao Yulong looked at Zhang Ruan with interest, and without any avoidance or suspicion merely remarked, "Biaomei is very intelligent." Today's stratagem was so brilliant that one can't help but gasp in amazement. Biaoge ought to know the concept of adding flowers to brocade, Zhang Ruan placidly replied. Jin Shang Xiu Hua. Add flowers to brocade/figure to give something additional splendor/ to provide the crowning touch/ derog. To benefit somebody who is already well off. The banter between these two was like a puzzling mystery, especially for Zhao Feizhou. As their words flew into his ears, he felt all the more confused and could not help scratching his head. What in the world are you two talking about? How come I don't seem to understand a single thing? Zhao Yulong inspected Zhang Ruan closely. Regardless, I still have to offer my thanks on behalf of the Zhao family. Although Zhao Yulong was about the same age as Zhao Feizhou personality-wise, he was much more mature than Zhao Feizhou. All the while he had felt that Zhang Ruan's personality was overtly cold and indifferent, and she seemed to harbor an ulterior motive of making use of General Fu for her benefit. If one were to say it was because of familial affinity, then it was really hard to see that fact. Today she had really lent a hand to the Zhao family because if it weren't for Zhang Ruan, the person who would have suffered a calamity at this golden chrysanthemum banquet would definitely have been Zhao Feizhou. If Guomeng really managed to enter the doors of the Zhao family, it was hard to even imagine the chaos and turbulence the family would face. Zhang Ruan's willingness to reach out and lend a hand clearly showed that she has some affection for the Zhao family. There's no need to thank me. The Xia family's intentions were actually directed at me, Zhang Ruan replied. For Yu Ye to randomly target the people from the Zhao family, it was merely for her to vent her anger towards her Jr. Currently Jiang Xing was far away and there was no way to touch him, and she was a Junju, which made Yu Ye somewhat cautious about the consequences. On the other hand, Zhao Feizhou was a simple blockhead who could be easily bullied, so that was why she could concoct such a devious plan. Zhao Yulong was just about to reply when an ear-piercing shriek sounded. Zhang Ruan! Zhao Feizhou! With that overbearing and impertinent attitude, if it was not Guomeng, then who else could it be? Guomeng had damning words to say. Out of the blue her face was disfigured, and upon waking she found out that something else had happened. As it stood, the bridge that was established between herself and Yu Ye had unraveled, therefore. At this point it was really too late to say anything else. However, when she walked out and saw Zhang Ruan, how could she prevent the anger erupting from within? Zhang Ruan raised her brows. It had already been over 4 hours, so it was time for Guomeng to wake up. But for her to display such an attitude, it really showed that this 5th Miss Guo was exactly like her mother. Without much intelligence. Guomeng dashed to the front of Zhang Ruan and angrily spat out, "You actually schemed against me." "You!" "Shut up," another female voice interrupted, her tone of voice strict. Turning back to have a look, it was eldest Miss Guo Guoxiang. "It's you." Was it you who plotted with them against me? Guomeng had seen Guxiang and immediately took on an arrogant posture, raising her voice in question. This bore such an uncanny resemblance to Zhang Fu's Zhang Li. A loud "pa" resounded. Guxiang had given Guomeng a slap without any hesitation. Everyone was stunned, and Guxiang's face turned frosty and her tone became a little colder. This slap is to teach you regarding what you can and cannot say. Then turning towards Zhang Ruan, this Guo family's eldest mishandled the matter in a magnanimous way that was befitting the situation and also was clear and definitive. In a solemn manner, she bowed in respect towards Zhang Ruan. My younger Shu sister has been disrespectful, hoping that Junju can be gracious and forgive her. Not to worry. Zhang Ruan smiled lightly. Chapter 140 The Xia Family in Chaos. Chapter 140. The Xia Family in Chaos. After the Golden Chrysanthemum banquet, everything seemed to return to a state of tranquility. However, on that day, Zhang Susu did not return in Yaoshi's carriage, only saying that some noble family's son had offered her his carriage and was determined to send Zhang Susu back to Jiangfu. For whatever reason, Zhang Susu had agreed. Only what people were mostly talking about was the two madams of the Xia family. In the carriage on the way back to Jiangfu, after Yaoshi learned about the heart of the matter from Zhao Feizhou, she thanked Zhang Ruan once again. Yet, there was still a note of bafflement in her voice as she asked, where did those two maidservants go? Until the very end, neither Yu Ye's personal maidservant nor the maidservant who had turned informant could be found anywhere. To this Zhang Ruan replied, the informant was my person. As for the personal maidservant of second Madame Xia, she has been sent to the rural residence, and arrangements will be made to move her out of the capital within a few days. Yaoshi nodded and felt more at peace. However, Zhao Yulong was not entirely convinced. Zhang Ruan had always done things neatly and efficiently, and would never leave any loose ends which could be used against her. To keep this maidservant of Yu Ye's alive would be too much of a lurking threat. Since Zhang Ruan was so ruthless, how could she so easily keep this possible menace close by? However, her words had always consisted of half-truths and ambiguity, and Zhao Yulong did not have any proof. Thus, all he could do was to make a note to himself to consider this matter further later. It seemed as though Zhang Quan had not yet returned by the time they reached the Fu. However, all the womenfolk looked at Zhang Ruan with different eyes. An old servant who was a little more courageous than the others even pulled Lu Zhu to one side to ask, softly, eldest Miss Xia is really the daughter of second Master Xia. Lu Zhu answered with a few perfunctory words before returning to Wanju with Zhang Ruan. Once there, she closed the door firmly. Lian Xiao and Bai Ji came forth to greet them, and Lian Xiao, in her usual straightforward manner, reported on everything at once. Miss, the news of the scandal within the Xia family has now spread to every corner of the capital. Master also knows of it. He encountered second Miss at the gate when she returned to the Fu, and he had only spoken a few words before they started to argue. Second Miss is right now in her courtyard reflecting on her errors, and Master left the Fu in a rage. Zhang Ruan raised her eyebrows. At present, with such a big hullabaloo in the Xia family, it was inevitable that Jiangfu would also be closely watched by the common people as they were related by marriage. What's more, Zhang Susu, for some reason as yet unknown, had returned home in a carriage belonging to the young scion of some wealthy family. Wasn't that simply handing the people additional fodder for gossip? The people would say that this propensity for ill behavior ran deep in the bones of the Xia family. In doing this, Zhang Susu was ensuring that Jiangfu would be tossed into the fire together with her. Moreover, although Jiangfu no longer glittered as brightly as it had in the past, how could they stand people talking about and poking fun at them? Although Zhang Quan loved Zhang Susu dearly, his anger was an inevitable outcome. Bai Ji said, nowadays, the Xia family can be said to have blackened its name, and I'm afraid eldest Miss Xia will have her name expunged from the list of imperial concubine candidates. Because she was a child that was conceived from her mother and uncle's affair, eldest Miss Xia was no longer considered pure, and so naturally could not enter the palace as an imperial concubine. Zhang Ruan looked down. In her previous life, Xia Jiao Jiao had been totally doted on in the palace due to the quiet support of Xia Cheng. However, even though they had been Meirin of the same status, the lives she and Xia Jiaojiao had led had been as different as chalk and cheese. Despite being no threat, Xia Jiaojiao would still seek her out every few days or so to cause trouble. This eldest Miss Xia, who thought herself a matchless beauty from a noble family, had now discovered that she was nothing but a hated spawn. Could there be a more drastic fall? Jinzui, golden branch, jade leaves, figure blue-blooded nobility, ESP imperial kinsman or peerless beauty. In Marquis Xiaofu, Shun Rou and Xia Tiankai were both kneeling on the ground. His face ashen, Xia Tianyi kicked Shun Rou violently and shouted, "Slut!" His eyes were also full of rancor as they glared at Xia Tiankai. Xia Cheng was holding the long whip which was used to enforce discipline in the family. The jet-black, shiny whip was incredibly thick and sturdy, and it was exceptionally sound as it had been soaked in a concoction for many years. When used, it would land on a person's body with a loud pa-pa. And so, after the occurrence of each sound, one more bloody line would appear on Shun Rou's tender and delicate skin. Please stop, Shun Rou wailed. Her clothes had long been ripped to shreds by the lash of the whip, and her usually pale, tender flesh was now covered in bloody scars. There was nothing to be seen of her usual beauty, and anyone looking at her now would feel sick. Gasping for breath, Xia Cheng lowered the whip. He had just administered more than 10 lashes, and was feeling the strain of the effort he had put into it. Xia Tiankai had been on intimate terms with Shun Rou for so many years, so when he saw her suffering, his protective instinct caused him to say to Xia Cheng, "Father, this has nothing to do with Rower, it's all this son's fault. Please don't whip Rower anymore." It would have been better not to say anything. On hearing these words, Xia Cheng grew even more enraged. On thinking of how this useless son, who could not make anything of himself, had turned the Xia family into the laughingstock of the year together with this eldest daughter-in-law, due to an offense to common decency, he wished that he had never had such a son like Xia Tiankai. Immediately, he swung the whip and lashed out towards Xia Tiankai. "Leoi, don't!" A cry of alarm sounded from the side and Xia Foran threw herself towards them. She gripped Xia Cheng's arm with one hand and said, "Tiankai is your son. How can you bear to whip him? It's all this woman's fault, she seduced Tiankai. If anything should happen to Tiankai today, I won't be able to live. If you want to whip him, then whip me as well." Xia Tianyi's personality was stiff and harsh, and he was not as adaptable and quick-witted as Xia Tiankai, who was an old hand at sweeping people off their feet with a mouthful of pretty words. Xia Tiankai was usually able to coax Xia Foran into submission, and she most loved this second son of hers. Even though she was angry and grieved that Xia Tiankai had acted so disgracefully, the moment she saw him being whipped, she grew anxious and rushed to protect him. On seeing this, Xia Cheng's fury swelled. Doting mothers spoil their children. Doting mothers spoil their children. Yuya, who had been quietly standing to one side watching the show, immediately felt a sense of dissatisfaction on seeing Xia Tiankai defending Shun Rou. She was nothing but a cheap slut, but even when the situation had reached this state, Xia Tiankai still had pity on her. If only Xia Cheng had whipped Shun Rou to death. Xia Tianyi was also seething at what his own younger brother had done. When those whose dispositions are normally gloomy and inflexible are infected with bitter resentment, it is to an extent that people cannot imagine. Yuya said in a mournful tone, "It's all very well for mother to say this, but isn't this too unfair towards eldest brother-in-law? Eldest brother-in-law has been wronged, yet has anyone asked him for his opinion?" Xia Foran was at a loss for words while Xia Cheng glanced at his eldest son somewhat apologetically. Leaving aside the impact of this situation on the family of the second son, with respect to the family of the eldest son, where Xia Tianyi was concerned, it was like a fatal deluge. The wife he had loved for so many years had in actuality been making him wear a green hat for all of those years, and the adulterer in question was his own younger brother. What's more, he had been bringing up someone else's daughter the whole time. Of all possible behaviors, nothing else brought a man more shame and humiliation, and if Xia Cheng had been in his place, he would have already cut down the cheating couple with his sword out of sheer rage. Fang, lit. Second room/house, i.e., the family/descendants of the second son, or the family of the concubine. Da Fang. Lit. Biggest/eldest room/house, i.e., the family/descendants of the eldest son, could also refer to the main/legal wife. Go Nan Nu. Lit. Dog man and woman. Although Xia Tianyi was not as outstanding as Xia Tiankai and did what he had to do without much flair, he was dependable, and had never given Xia Cheng any cause for grief even from childhood. The only thing Xia Cheng had not been satisfied with was Xia Tianyi's excessive doting on Shenrou. Even though Shenrou had only borne him a daughter, Xia Tianyi had not taken a concubine. Apart from the 2 bed servants that had been taken in when Shenrou's body was weak at that time, Shenrou's status had not changed. And it was precisely this pampered wife who had made Xia Tianyi wear such a big green hat. His state of mind and emotions at this point could clearly be imagined. Xia Cheng knew that he was wronging Xia Tianyi by not allowing him to kill Xia Tiankai, but this was something he absolutely could not permit. So he could only lash out at Xia Tiankai fiercely, in order to give Xia Tianyi a small measure of revenge. He was about to take action when the voice of a youthful girl sounded in the hall. "Mother, what's happened to you?" Xia Jiao had heard from the servants that her mother and second uncle were being whipped in the hall by Xia Cheng. At first, she had reckoned this as no more than the servants talking nonsense, for Shenrou was highly favored within the Xia family, so there was no reason for her mother to be punished. However, a faint suspicion caused her to come and take a look, whereupon she was struck with paralyzing terror. Shenrou had been whipped until she was covered in blood, and lay on the ground on the brink of death. What is more, her father, who had always doted on Shenrou, was standing to one side, cold and detached, with not a whit of tenderness in his expression. On second glance, Xia Tiankai was also completely devoid of his usual distinguished, confident and easy attitude, but he was clearly much better off than Shenrou's injured state. He cut a sorry figure as he knelt on the ground, with several bloodied lines across his back. Xia Cheng held a whip, with an intense gaze that seemed to devour people. With fear in her heart, Xia Jiao ran quickly to Shenrou's side, crying as she said, "Mother, what's happened to you?" Shenrou weakly opened her eyes and saw her daughter. With great difficulty she eked out, "Jiao, leave quickly." "I'm not going," Xia Jiao declared as she cried even more bitterly. Glaring at Xia Cheng, she said, "Zufu, what wrong has mother done that you have to whip her until this state? Aren't you killing her?" Xia Cheng did not want Xia Jiao to know what was going on, so he responded severely, "Go back to your courtyard. You are not allowed to come out." "I'm not going," Xia Jiao cried out sharply. She turned her head to look at Xia Tianyi, who was standing indifferently and silently to the side. In a sudden movement, she grabbed onto Xia Tianyi's legs and sobbed as she said, "Father, Zufu is going to kill mother. Are you just going to look on without doing anything? Father, are you seriously so callous?" Xia Jiao was naturally beautiful and dainty, and her weeping appearance was truly pitiful. Xia Tianyi had always especially doted on her. When Xia Jiao was born, even though she was a daughter, Xia Tianyi had never felt the least bit disappointed about this. From childhood, Xia Jiao had grown up in comfortable living conditions, and Xia Tianyi had never spoken a harsh word to her. If it had been any other day, with Xia Jiao crying like this, Xia Tianyi would have long felt incredibly pain due to his affection for her. But today, the instant he looked at Xia Jiao's face, all he could see was his beloved wife and his younger brother in bed, in the throes of passion. Immediately, his anger flared up and Xia Jiao's face caused him extreme nausea. Xia Jiao observed the change of expression on Xia Tianyi's face, but before she could grasp the reason why he had kicked her away. Xia Tianyi was a man, and he was full of pent-up anger, so his kick was exceptionally forceful. Xia Jiao flew across the room and landed on a table on which a small porcelain pot of hot soup was simmering. Suddenly there was a blood-curdling shriek, for the scalding hot soup had splashed Xiao Jiao from head to toe. Covering her face, Xia Jiao rolled on the floor, screaming in pain. How could there be a good outcome when something which is scalding hot is cast on a young lady's delicate skin? Everyone present was stunned by this sudden misfortune. Shunro spat out a mouthful of blood and saw the world through a black haze as she fainted away. Xia Tiankai's heart was full of pain. For Xia Jiaojiao was his daughter. Half crazed due to what he had just witnessed, he charged at Xia Tian, roaring Xia Tian. With Xia Tiankai's action, the complicated tangle of emotions within Xia Tian was finally dispelled. He laughed grimly, and an odd smile appeared on his usually stoic face. Towards Xia Jiaojiao, who was rolling on the ground and crying out in pain, he snarled, "I am not your father. He is your father, your second uncle. You are the bastard whom your mother and her lover gave birth to. Don't call me your father." With such words being spat out from the mouth of the man who doted upon Xia Jiaojiao the most, not only Xia Tiankai, but even Xia Chong and Xia Furan were struck dumb. No one knew whether Xia Jiaojiao had heard Xia Tiankai's words, as she continued to shriek on the ground covering her face. Xia Chong and Xia Furan felt somewhat numb. They hurriedly called in a maidservant to carry Xia Jiaojiao away, with an invitation for the doctor to come to the fu. However, everyone had clearly seen the wave of scalding hot soup fall on Xia Jiaojiao, and it was feared that Xia Jiaojiao's face was now ruined. Although Xia Tiankai felt anguish for Xia Jiaojiao, he feared this eldest brother more, whose mood had turned dark and dreadful in the twinkling of an eye. He fell silent and dared not say another word. Shunro was unconscious, her body covered with bloody wounds. If she roused and found out what had happened to Xia Jiaojiao, she would be devastated, to the point that life would not be worth living. If she could still live, that is. Yuya was as pleased as Punch at the situation that was unfolding before her eyes. Shunro had to eat the bitter fruit of her own actions, and that bastard girl's face had also been ruined. For the time being, Xia Tiankai would not dare to play around outside. Xia Jiaojiao had suffered such a mishap. Xia Furan was crying hysterically. Shunro was at her last gasp. Xia Chong was in no mood to continue laying down the family law. He would allow Xia Tiankai to slink back to his own residence, and bid someone to carry Shunro back to the women's quarters to be locked up. Xia Chong looked at Xia Tianyi and was about to say something, but Xia Tianyi turned and stormed off without a word, his face blank of any expression. Upon seeing this, Xia Chong could not help but feel alarmed. The more emotionless Xia Tianyi was, the more uneasy Xia Chong became, as he feared that Xia Tianyi would do something that would overstep the bounds of what was acceptable in his rage. Although Xia Tianyi looked unaffected, if any man were to have the same situation placed on his heart, there would be no way that he would be willing to take things lying down. It would have been better if Xia Tianyi had hit Xia Tiankai, even just once, but he had said nothing. After Xia Tianyi left, Xia Tiankai was helped back to his residence, and the only person remaining in the hall with Xia Chong was Yuya. Xia Chong eyed Yuya coldly, snorted, then started to leave without a word. Yuya was startled, as she thought that Xia Chong would take her to task over Guomeng's matter. She hurriedly chased after him and said, "Father, I didn't order anyone to harm Guomeng." "Yuya, don't forget your identity," Xia Chong said out of the blue. Seeing Yuya's puzzled expression, he said coldly, "Even in death, you are also a member of the Xia family." When evening came, Yuya finally realized the meaning of Xia Cheng's words. As Xia Tiankai was injured and Xia Furan doted on him, she ordered someone to boil medicine for his wounds and bring it to him, and made clear to Yuya that she was to look after Xia Tiankai well. Although Yuya bore much resentment towards Xia Tiankai, she still acknowledged him as her husband and treated him sincerely. Although she had been angry, she had witnessed both what had happened to Shinro and Xia Jiaojiao's disfigurement. Thus, her anger had abated, and she felt much more at ease. As a result, when she brought the medicine to Xia Tiankai's bedside, she did so without any of her former temper, and was about to feed him the medicine personally. She did not imagine that Xia Tiankai would overturn the bowl of medicine in her hands with one swipe. Yuya was dumbfounded. Her anger spiked again and she screeched, "Xia Tiankai! Bitch!" Xia Tiankai stared daggers at her. Xia Tiankai was an out-and-out womanizer with a face that was very attractive to women, as well as having a silver tongue. At home, although he had never given Yuya any special treatment, on the surface it appeared that the relationship between them was amiable. In addition, he had never made such a fuss or uttered such harsh words like this. What are you talking about? By nature, Yuya was impetuous and unwilling to admit defeat. She immediately stood up and said, Xiaotong Kai, you fooled around with your own sister-in-law, and you still have the gall to curse me? What right do you have to curse me? Who are you putting on this noble and virtuous air for? Xiaotong Kai laughed mockingly and said, If you think that way, why don't you look for eldest brother and see if he is willing to tumble in bed with you? Yu, why are you so shameless? Yuya said in shock. Humph. Xiaotong Kai was highly dissatisfied with Yuya, and his words were bitingly malicious. Didn't you act like this today in order to thoroughly discredit Roer? Are you satisfied now? Yuya, to be honest, back then, if it wasn't for your father and your dowry, I would have much rather marry a prostitute than you. There's nothing good about you. You are neither gentle nor pleasant, and I feel sick having to look at your high and mighty appearance every day. You think that just because you gave birth to a son, you can run wild and abuse your status any way you like in the Fu? I tell you, I don't give a damn about your son. In future, I can have many more sons, and in my heart, only Jiao Jiao is my daughter. Xiaotong Kai, how can you say such things? Yuya felt as if she had been struck by lightning. She had shared a bed with this man for so many years, and only now was she discovering, only now did she realize what her own husband had always been actually thinking. Do you really think father won't be angry that you've done something like this? What do you take Marquis Xiaofu for? As some place you can mess with as you like. Xiaotong Kai sneered as he said, Since your status is that of second madam of the Xiao family, you should obediently listen to me. It was only at this point that Yuya realized why Xiaochong had given her such an odd look as he left just now, and what his final words had meant. Xiaochong blamed her for exposing this situation and bringing disgrace to the Xiao family. Xiaochong was extremely resentful of her, and he would not take action to help her out of any predicaments in future. It was even likely that henceforth he would think of ways to make her life miserable. The Xiao family itself had generated this kind of shameful situation, and instead of searching their own consciences, they were blaming her? Yuya simply wanted to laugh. You just stay in the Fu and atone for what you've done to Roer and Jiao Jiao, declared Xiaotong Kai. Xiaotong Kai, you are not human, Yuya screamed before she charged at Xiaotong Kai, full of hatred, and scratched his body and face wildly with both hands. Xiaotong Kai did not anticipate that Yuya would be this shrewish and unrestrained beneath her external appearance, but even though he was injured, he was still a man, and immediately fought back with his greater strength. For a moment, the both of them were locked in a bitter embrace as each one struggled to gain the upper hand. In the midst of this chaos, neither of them noticed that someone had pushed open the door a crack at some stage. Xia Jun stood silently by the door, impassively watching the melee within. That pair of gloomy eyes watching them unblinkingly was rather terrifying. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.